The galaxy does not want humanity to survive. This is not a metaphor. It is not the paranoid doctrine of a species that has let its war culture calcify into ideology. The galaxy does not want humanity to survive in the way that fire does not want wood to survive. Not through malice, not through the deliberate hatred of a conscious enemy, but as the simple consequence of what the galaxy contains, and what humanity is, and what the contact between those two things produces. Most of what the stars hold is indifferent, some of it is hostile, and some of it is something worse than hostile. Something that perceives humanity specifically and has determined that humanity specifically must end. Space Marines exist because of this, because the Emperor looked at what the galaxy was and what it contained, and he understood that whatever humanity became in the future would have to be fought for against the full weight of a universe that had produced things which were better adapted to survive it than man. He made the Adeptus Astartes to hold the line, to be the answer that the scale of the threat required, to stand between ordinary people and the things that want to end ordinary people, and to be capable of standing where ordinary people cannot. But the Space Marines are not one kind of warrior. They never have been. The galaxy's threats are too varied for a single doctrine to address all of them. And the men who wrote those doctrines understood this. You fight a Chaos warband differently from a Tyranid swarm. You fight a greenskin tide differently from a Tau sphere of expansion. You fight an Eldar raiding party differently from a Necron tomb awakening. The skills that make a warrior devastating in one context can make him a liability in another. And there is no chapter with the resources to develop genuine depth of expertise across every kind of Xenos threat the galaxy can produce. Which is where the Deathwatch come in. They are called the shield that slays. It is an apt name. It captures something true about what they are. The paradox of a force built simultaneously to protect and to destroy. They are the chamber militant of the Ordo Xenos, the military arm of the branch of the Inquisition that concerns itself with alien threats. They fight under black armor that carries the marks of a dozen chapters. Because they are not a chapter, they are something rarer and stranger than that. An institution without a homeworld, without a founding gene seed, without the single cultural identity that every other Space Marine force is built around. They are built instead around a purpose. The purpose is the alien, not every alien. The Deathwatch do not concern themselves with minor incursions or routine patrol actions that standard military forces can handle. They concern themselves with the threats that ordinary warfare cannot address. The intelligence operations that require surgical precision, the emerging xenocide-level threats that need to be assessed and contained before they become the kinds of problems that entire legions once faced. The artifacts and intelligences and biological samples that the Ordo Xenos needs recovered before the relevant alien is destroyed. The situations, in short, that require warriors with specialist knowledge of their enemy, and with the judgment to act on that knowledge without a command hierarchy above them to authorize every decision. The Deathwatch are experts in killing things that are not human. That is the short version. The longer version takes a great deal more time, and runs through the history of the Imperium, and the history of every major alien power it has encountered, and passes through the darkest corners of the galaxy's xenobiology, and arrives at a portrait of an institution that is stranger and more significant and more costly than anything the short version suggests. This is what they are, where they came from, what they do and what they carry and what they lose, and why, in a galaxy full of extraordinary warriors, these particular warriors wearing this particular armor on this particular mission are the ones who determine whether some of humanity's most acute crises end in survival or extinction. Because the galaxy's most dangerous threats do not announce themselves at the border and wait for reinforcements, they do not give the Imperium's bureaucracy time to process the relevant paperwork and dispatch an appropriate response through the usual channels. They arrive in the dark, without warning. And by the time most forces could be mobilized to address them, the window in which they could be stopped has already closed. The Deathwatch do not need channels and timelines and the mobilization of conventional forces. They are already there, or they can be there faster, and they arrive with everything they need to end the threat they have been sent to end. 5 warriors sometimes, 10 perhaps for a larger target, almost never more than 15. And the 15 are worth more against the specific enemy they face than a conventional force 5 times their size. That is the principle. That is why they exist. That is the argument that was made for them at their founding and that has been validated across every millennium since. Paid for in blood on 1,000 worlds against enemies that the rest of the Imperium often does not even know it faces. Let us begin at the beginning. Let us begin with a war that almost ended everything, and the warrior who looked at the wreckage and decided that what the Imperium needed was something that had never been tried before. 1,500 years after the Horus Heresy, the Imperium faced something that made the galaxy forget, briefly, about everything else. The Beast. The specifics belong to a different story. The War of the Beast is its own catastrophe, deserving its own accounting. And what it did to the Imperium is not something that can be adequately addressed in the margins of another subject. But the relevant fact for this story is simple. The largest Orc incursion in recorded human history arrived in M32. And one of the things it brought with it was a problem that the Imperium had never had to solve before in quite this form. The problem was that the standard tools were not working. The Imperium was accustomed to fighting Orcs. It had been fighting them since before the Great Crusade, and across 2,000 years of conflict it had developed doctrines and equipment and strategic frameworks adequate to the task. Throw enough warriors at a sufficient enough war boss. Eventually the numbers favored the Imperium and the greenskins were ground down. The Wa'ar collapsed, the tide receded. The Imperium rebuilt and waited for the next one. The Beast refused this pattern. The Beast's Wa'ar had a coherence to it that greenskin forces almost never achieve. Something that looked uncomfortably like coordination, like strategy, like the application of intelligence to the problem of destroying humanity. The attack moons that the Beast deployed were weapons of a sophistication that the Orc race was not supposed to be capable of producing. The pace of the advance was not the sprawling, chaotic expansion of a normal warg, but something faster, more deliberate, aimed with intent at targets that mattered. And the Imperium's conventional responses were failing. Corland understood this. He was the chapter master of the Imperial Fists at the time. And in the particular catastrophe of the War of the Beast, he became something more than that, the last of his chapter's original line, elected Lord Commander of the Imperium by the stunned survivors of an institution that had been stripped of most of its capable leadership by the Beast's assault on Terra. He was, in short, the man who had to find a solution to the problem that conventional solutions could not address. He found it in an idea. The idea was not entirely new. Small units of specialist warriors operating with surgical precision rather than overwhelming force were a concept that Space Marine thinking had circled around in various forms since the Crusade. But Corland's articulation of it was specific to the problem he faced. What he needed against the beast's attack moon above Terra was not an army. An army would be destroyed before it reached the objective. What he needed was a handful of warriors, the best warriors available, drawn from multiple chapters precisely because no single chapter had the full range of expertise the mission required, who could be inserted past the defenses, reach the target, and accomplish what needed to be accomplished. He called warriors from the surviving loyal chapters. He put them together in small formations. He sent them at the attack moon with a mission that an army could not have achieved. It worked. Not cleanly, nothing in the War of the Beast worked cleanly, and the cost in warriors was not small. But the principle was vindicated. The small, mixed chapter kill team could do things that conventional force could not, could infiltrate and strike and achieve objectives that required skill and knowledge and precision rather than numbers. And the advantage of drawing from multiple chapters was real and measurable. Warriors who had faced different enemies, developed different specialities, thought about war in different ways, combined into something more adaptive than any single chapter could field. The war continued. The beast required more than one solution, and Corland's kill teams were one thread in a much larger and more desperate strategy. But the thread held, and when the war was eventually won at enormous cost, the question became what to do with the principle Corland had established. The answer was to institutionalize it. A power-sharing agreement forged between Corland and the Inquisitorial representative Wienand in the war's closing phases established the framework. The kill teams would continue. They would be formalized under Inquisitorial authority, specifically under the Ordo Xenos, whose purview covered alien threats, and whose investigative and intelligence functions made them the natural patron for warriors who operated in the space between standard military engagement and clandestine action. But a Space Marine would serve as their leading officer. The institution would not be swallowed by the Inquisition. It would be a partnership, uneasy at times but durable. The First Watch commander was a warrior named Asker Warfist. The organization he led was given its name. The armor that its members would wear was determined. The conventions that would govern its operation were established. And the Deathwatch was born 1,500 years after the Horus Heresy. 1,500 years after the Emperor made his warriors and sent them out into the galaxy to fight for everything. A new kind of fighter appeared in the Imperium's arsenal. Not a new legion, not a new chapter. Something smaller, stranger, and in its own way more terrible than either. The Deathwatch. There is an older tradition that some scholars argue predates Corland, the Apocryphon Conclave of Orphite IV, a gathering of Ordo Xenos Inquisitor lords that supposedly formalized an even earlier arrangement between the Inquisition and certain Astartes chapters. The truth is uncertain. The records from before M32 are fragmentary on this point, and the Inquisition does not publish its founding documents for general scholarly review. What can be said with confidence is that by the time of the War of the Beast, Corland's innovation had canonical precedent in at least some of the arrangements that already existed between Space Marine chapters and the Ordo Xenos. Whether this means the Deathwatch is older than M32 or simply that Corland was building on existing relationships when he formalized the kill team structure, is not a question the available evidence answers cleanly. What matters is what the Deathwatch became. And what it became over the millennia that followed its founding was the Imperium's sharpest and strangest instrument, an answer to questions that other organizations were not equipped to ask, operated by warriors who are not like any other warriors in the Adeptus Astartes. Because to be Deathwatch is not simply to be a space marine who fights aliens. It is to become something that no single chapter can make. Something that only the specific crucible of the long vigil can produce. And the long vigil begins with a choice, and an oath, and the putting on of black armour that will mark you for whatever time the watch requires. A space marine's identity is his chapter. This sounds simple, and in the statement it is, but the implications run deep. A space marine does not have a family in the ordinary human sense. The transformation that made him what he is stripped that away along with the vulnerabilities of ordinary human emotional architecture. What he has instead is a brotherhood, a community of warriors who share his gene seed and his training and his history, and the specific culture that each chapter develops over the centuries of its existence. The Ultramarines are not simply warriors who happen to wear blue. They are a tradition, a philosophy, a way of understanding what it means to fight for the Imperium, and what excellence in that fight looks like. The Space Wolves are not simply warriors who happen to come from Fenris. They are a family in the most complete sense the word retains for post-human beings, built around the specific bonds of Fenrisian pack culture expressed through the lens of transhuman war. Every chapter is this. Every chapter is a world unto itself, with its rituals and its relics and its internal mythology, and the accumulated weight of its history pressing down on every warrior who carries its gene seed and wears its colors. And then, the Deathwatch calls, and a warrior leaves. The process by which a space marine comes to serve the long vigil varies between chapters. In some, it is a formal honor. The chapter actively selects its finest veterans and presents them as candidates for the Deathwatch's service, considering it a mark of the chapter's quality that its warriors are sought by an organization with standards as high as the Watch's. In others, Inquisitors of the Ordo Xenos take a more direct role, identifying candidates through their own networks and approaching the relevant chapter masters. In some rare cases, individual warriors petition for the honor themselves, driven by a particular devotion to the mission of Xenos eradication, or by circumstances on their home campaign that make them especially suited for what the Watch requires. Whatever the route, the result is the same. A warrior who has spent years or decades as a fully formed member of his chapter's community is asked to leave it. Temporarily, the long vigil is not a permanent transfer in most cases, and the warrior who completes his service returns to his chapter, changed by what he has experienced. But the leaving is real. He will not fight beside his chapter brothers for the duration. He will not participate in the rituals and the campaigns that form the substance of chapter life. He will go to a watch fortress and be absorbed into an institution that operates by different rules and demands different things. He swears an oath before he goes. The Apocryphal Oath, one of the most significant commitments a space marine will make in a life full of significant commitments. It binds him to the service of the Deathwatch and, through the Deathwatch, to the Ordo Xenos. It commits him to the mission of Xenos eradication above any other priority for the duration of his service. And it contains an important clause about knowledge, what he learns in the Deathwatch, about the alien enemies he faces and the methods he employs against them, and the intelligence he gathers on their nature and capabilities. He takes back to his chapter only in the form of his own enhanced capability and judgment. He does not speak of it, not the missions, not the classified intelligence, not the things the Ordo Xenos has shown him about what the galaxy contains. He returns to his brothers and he carries his experience as a private resource, available in his own decision-making and his own fighting, but sealed against the kind of direct transfer that would put classified information in the hands of institutions over which the Inquisition has no authority. This oath of silence is not paranoia. It is the consequence of what the Ordo Xenos actually knows. The intelligence about alien threats that the Watch's members accumulate in service is some of the most sensitive information in the Imperium. The kind of intelligence whose misuse could compromise ongoing operations, alert alien intelligences to the Watch's methods, or produce panic in chapter masters who do not have the full context required to respond to the information wisely. The Inquisition's classification of this intelligence is not an arbitrary exercise of institutional power. It is the management of information whose implications are genuinely destabilizing in the wrong hands. The warrior accepts this. He accepts the oath in its entirety, including its limitations, because to serve in the Deathwatch is to understand that the mission is larger than the individual, and that the individual's comfort with the constraints of the mission is not a factor in whether those constraints are appropriate. Then comes the armour. The armour is the most visible expression of what the Deathwatch is and what it is not. A Space Marine's armour is personal, not in the civilian sense of a possession, but in the deeper sense of a history. Each suit of power armor has a machine spirit, a consciousness of sorts, the accumulated presence of decades or centuries of use by the warrior who wears it. And between a warrior and his armor there is a bond that the Adeptus Mechanicus catalogues in technical terms, and that warriors describe in language that sounds almost religious. Repainting the armor is not a cosmetic act. It is a meaningful one. The Deathwatch's color is black, and the process of applying it to a warrior's armor is a ceremony rather than a maintenance task. Every plate is repainted, but not entirely. The right pauldron, the shoulder guard, retains the color and markings of the warrior's original chapter. It is kept deliberately as the thing that cannot be taken. A warrior who enters the Deathwatch does not cease to be a blood angel or a space wolf or a dark angel. He remains what he was. The Deathwatch does not replace his chapter identity. It adds to it, superimposes the black over everything except the one plate that stays as it was, the marker of what he was before and what he will be again. The left pauldron receives the Deathwatch's own marking, the stylist eye bisected by an hourglass, the symbol of the Inquisition incorporated into the Watch's own iconography, the visible statement that this warrior now serves under a different authority with a different mission. He looks different from any space marine he has served beside before. He is not one thing, he is two, held together by the oath and by the purpose and by the specific identity that the Watch builds in its members. Not a replacement for chapter loyalty, but something that stands alongside it. A second layer of belonging to something that matters. Then he goes to his kill team, and the real work begins. No two kill teams are the same. This is not an accident of logistics or an inevitable consequence of the Deathwatch's decentralized structure. It is a deliberate feature of the organization's doctrine, built into the kill team as its defining characteristic, the thing that makes it different from every other small unit formation in the Adeptus Astartes. The kill team is diverse by design, because diversity is what the alien threat demands, and because the combination of skills and perspectives that different chapter veterans bring is the thing that makes a kill team capable of things that no single chapter equivalent can achieve. Think about what that means in practice. A kill team might contain a space wolf who has spent decades fighting in void warfare, an ultramarine whose background is in strategic analysis and tactical coordination, a salamander whose expertise lies in the close-range annihilation of heavily armored targets, a raven guard whose speciality is infiltration and reconnaissance, and a blood angel whose rage and grace in close combat has been refined through centuries of fighting the most dangerous prey the galaxy produces. These warriors did not train together. Their chapters have different cultures, different philosophies, sometimes different theologies. They may have chapters that have been in conflict with each other in the past. The wolves and the angels in particular carry the weight of certain historical incidents that their respective traditions remember differently, and yet they are supposed to fight as one unit, against an enemy none of them has necessarily faced in quite this form, in conditions that did not exist when the mission briefing was written. This should not work. By every principle of military organization that emphasizes unit cohesion and shared experience and the deep mutual understanding that comes from fighting together over years, a group of strangers from different cultures with different training frameworks should not be effective in the field. But the Deathwatch has been running kill teams for millennia, and the evidence of those millennia is that they work. That the combination of diverse capabilities and the pressure of a shared mission produces something that coalesces faster and more completely than any theory of unit cohesion would predict. Part of this is selection. The warriors chosen for the long vigil are veterans by definition. They have already proven themselves in their chapter's service, already demonstrated the judgment and the capability that marks a warrior as exceptional rather than merely competent. They are not untested recruits who need to learn how to be soldiers. They know how to fight. They know how to think under pressure. They know how to read a tactical situation and contribute meaningfully to its resolution without needing constant supervision. The raw material is already extraordinary. Part of it is the mission itself. Facing a Xenos threat has a focusing effect that shared peril dissolves internal cultural differences that no amount of institutional goodwill could have dissolved. A Raven Guard and a Space Wolf who have spent the first week of their service being politely hostile to each other about some ancient grievance between their chapters will generally stop being hostile to each other the moment a Tyranid swarm establishes contact, and the question becomes not who is right about the historical incident, but whether they are going to survive the next 10 minutes. Shared danger creates shared purpose, and shared purpose creates the beginnings of shared identity. The kill team becomes, over the course of its deployment, a community with its own specific dynamics. The internal hierarchy that emerges not from formal rank but from demonstrated capability. The mutual understanding of each warrior's strengths and limitations that develops through combat. The trust that builds when someone has saved your life and you have saved theirs, and the count has evened out enough times that saving each other has become automatic. This community is not the same as a chapter brotherhood. It is smaller, stranger, assembled from components that were designed for a different context and are finding a new one. But it is real. The bonds that form in kill teams are among the strongest in the Adeptus Astartes, forged in the most demanding conditions and between warriors who had no prior reason to care about each other. Warriors who return from the long vigil describe their kill team with a feeling that is hard to name. Not better than the chapter brotherhood, but different, and in its way irreplaceable. The kill team's composition is determined by the mission it is assigned. This is the second genius of the structure. It is adaptive. A mission that requires infiltration and intelligence gathering gets a different combination than a mission that requires the annihilation of a hardened position. A mission against Tyranids is planned differently from a mission against Necrons, and the team assembled for it reflects what the specific capabilities of the target demand. The Watch Commander and the supporting Ordo Xenos intelligence apparatus have, over the centuries, developed a considerable understanding of what works against what, and the kill team that arrives at the target is not a random selection but the result of a considered assessment of the specific problem. No fewer than 5 warriors. No more than 15. In that range, the entire spectrum of what a kill team can be lives, from the 5-man infiltration cell that can move through an alien environment without being detected, to the 15-strong assault force that can break a fortified Xenos position that a larger conventional force would fail against because it would be detected before it arrived. The kill team goes in where armies cannot follow, or where armies would take too long to get there, or where the Ordo Xenos' operational requirements demand that the job be done without the kind of broad deployment that armies require, and the political complications of that deployment produce. The kill team is the Deathwatch's answer to the question of what to do when the standard options are insufficient, and the answer it provides is 5 to 15 warriors who are exactly the right 5 to 15 for this particular mission, arriving before the window closes, doing what needs to be done, and then, most of the time, leaving, because the kill team is not an occupation force. It is a blade, used once for the specific cut it was designed for, and then withdrawn, most of the time. There are exceptions. There are kill teams that arrive at their mission and find something worse than what the briefing described. There are warriors who go to watch fortresses and never leave them, because the mission has grown beyond what a short deployment can address. There are situations in the galaxy's dark corners where the Deathwatch needs not a blade but a constant grinding presence, a vigil maintained without respite against threats that do not leave once you have broken them open. For these there is the Watch Fortress itself, and the warriors who make it their home for years or decades, and eventually, in some cases, forever. The Watch Fortresses are among the most important installations the Imperium maintains, and among the least known. This is deliberate. A Watch Fortress's value depends substantially on the enemy not knowing exactly where it is, not knowing the full extent of what intelligence it holds, not knowing the composition of the forces it can deploy. Secrecy is not simply an operational preference for the Deathwatch. It is part of how the Deathwatch works. The kill team that operates from the shadows of incomplete enemy knowledge is the kill team that reaches its objective. And the intelligence gathered by the Ordo Xenos that is not known to be gathered is the intelligence that shapes operations the enemy cannot anticipate. So the watch fortresses are not publicly listed in the Imperium's administrative records in the way that a Space Marine chapter's home fortress monastery might be. Their locations are classified to the level appropriate to the operational significance of what they overlook. They sit at the edges of contested space, or above worlds adjacent to alien territories, or in the void between star systems in positions that make them difficult to locate, and more difficult to approach without being detected. They are not small. A watch fortress is a substantial installation, capable of housing significant forces and supporting the fleet assets the Deathwatch uses to deploy kill teams across vast stretches of space. But they are quiet, and they project much less of the presence that most military installations of their capability would generate. Each watch fortress is a strategic node in the Deathwatch's network, positioned to address the threats of its region. The threats vary enormously by region. The alien presence in the galactic east is different from what presses on the north, different again from the cold silence of the ancient tombs that lie beneath the southern reaches. A watch fortress positioned to monitor the outer limit of a Tyranid hive fleet's approach corridor is optimized differently from one that maintains the vigil against Necron activity in a sector rich in ancient contested worlds. The watch fortress is not simply a military base. It is a repository. Centuries of intelligence about alien threats accumulate in its archives. The records of kill team missions, the biological and technical analysis of alien specimens and artifacts, the strategic assessments of Ordo Xenos Inquisitors who have made the fortress their base of operations. A warrior who spends sufficient time at a watch fortress does not simply learn to fight the aliens of its region. He learns to understand them, their biology, their technology, their strategic habits, the ways in which they think, and the ways in which they do not think the way humans do. The Deathwatch's knowledge of alien species is the deepest and most detailed in the Imperium, because the Deathwatch has been accumulating it for millennia by the most direct possible method, going out there and engaging with it. Watch Fortress Ariok is perhaps the most famous, or at least the most documented in the materials that have been cleared for wider Inquisitorial review. It sits in the Jericho Reach, a region of the galaxy that has become one of the most complex and contested strategic environments in current Imperial history. The Jericho Reach is not a simple problem. It is simultaneously facing pressure from Tyranid activity from the tendril of High Fleet Dagon, Tau expansion from the sphere of influence that the Tauva has been extending into what Tau commanders call promising space, and the growing disturbances associated with the Necron entities whose ancient holdings extend through parts of the Reach. In most regions, any one of these threats would be the defining strategic crisis of the generation. The Jericho Reach has all three at once. Ariok watches all of them. The warriors of Ariok are not overwhelmed by this, or rather the organization of the Deathwatch means they do not need to be, because they are not fighting all three threats simultaneously in the conventional military sense. They are assessing, prioritizing, deploying kill teams against the most critical nodes of each threat in sequence, and maintaining the intelligence picture that makes those prioritizations possible. They are the thin black line between what the Jericho Reach is and what it would be without them. Not an army holding a front, but a scalpel cutting out the infections before they become conditions the body cannot survive. Talassa Prime is another of the major watch fortresses, distinctive for being one of the few that occupies an entire planet rather than a void station or orbital facility. Situated in the realm of Ultramar, It focuses substantially on the Tyranid threats that press on the eastern reaches of the Imperium, and maintains close working relationships with the Ultramarines, Scythes of the Emperor, and Lamentus chapters, whose territories and history make them among the most Tyranid-experienced forces in the Adeptus Astartes. The knowledge exchange between Thalassa Prime and these chapters flows in both directions. The Deathwatch's analytical framework applied to the chapter's direct combat experience, producing intelligence of a quality that neither could generate alone. And there are others. The Eye of Damocles, watching the Tau expansion with the specific attention of warriors who understand how the Tau think and fight, and why underestimating them has proved fatal on more than one occasion. Fort Pikeman. The unnamed stations at the edges of exploration zones where Deathwatch warriors maintain vigils against threats that don't yet have names. The network is vast, and the network is quiet, and it functions as the Imperium's early warning system against the kinds of alien threats that do not announce themselves through conventional military activity. Inside a watch fortress, the watch commander oversees everything. Not a chapter master, not exactly. The watch commander is the senior officer of the watch fortress, responsible for the deployment of kill teams and the management of the intelligence picture that drives those deployments. They work closely with the Ordo Xenos Inquisitors who make the fortress their base, and the relationship between watch commanders and Inquisitors is one of the more interesting dynamics in the Deathwatch's institutional culture. Because the Inquisition and the Adeptus Astartes do not always agree on what the mission requires, and the Watch Fortress is exactly the kind of close-quarters institution where that disagreement becomes personal. The Ordo Xenos and the Deathwatch are partners. This is the official formulation, and it is accurate as far as it goes, which is not quite as far as the reality of the relationship. The Ordo Xenos is one of the three great branches of the Inquisition, charged with investigating and addressing the threat that alien civilizations pose to humanity. Its Inquisitors range from the narrowly focused, devoted to the study and eventual elimination of a single Xenos species or threat vector, to the encyclopedically broad, maintaining a strategic intelligence picture across entire regions of alien activity. They are scholars as much as soldiers, investigators as much as hunters, and they operate with the full authority of the Inquisition behind them, which means they can command resources from virtually every institution in the Imperium, including the Deathwatch. The relationship was formalized in the founding arrangement that Corland negotiated, and the formalism is important. The Deathwatch serves the Ordo Xenos as its chamber militant, but it is not simply a military force that Inquisitors can direct without constraint. The Watch Commander maintains authority over how kill teams are deployed, which means that an Inquisitor who wants the Deathwatch to take a specific action needs to make a case for it, and can be refused if the Watch Commander determines that the action does not align with the Deathwatch's operational requirements. In practice, the relationship is more collaborative than the formal hierarchy suggests. An Ordo Xenos Inquisitor who has been operating in a region knows things that the Watch Commander may not. Intelligence gathered through the Inquisitor's own networks, contacts in alien species that the warrior component of the relationship would never have, analytical frameworks for understanding threats that the Inquisitor has spent decades developing. The Deathwatch warriors bring what they bring: the physical capability, the tactical expertise, the knowledge of how to engage alien forces effectively. The Inquisitors bring what they bring. The combination is more effective than either alone. but the tension is real. Inquisitors are accustomed to authority. The very nature of the Inquisition, the absolute mandate to protect the Imperium from threats of all kinds, with tools that include the authority to override almost any other institution, shapes a certain temperament in its members. An inquisitor who has spent years prosecuting investigations in conditions where her authority was the only thing keeping the operation viable does not naturally default to collegial decision-making when she needs a kill team to hit a target. And Space Marines do not respond well to being treated as tools to be deployed by an external authority without consultation. They are not tools. They are warriors with professional expertise and ethical frameworks of their own. And the kill team on the ground often has information the Inquisitor does not have, sees things in the mission environment that the planning session did not anticipate. The warrior's judgment in the moment is not something that can be substituted by the Inquisitor's authority from orbit. The most successful Ordo Xenos Inquisitors who work with the Deathwatch are the ones who understand this, who know that their authority exists to make requests and create operational frameworks, not to micromanage how warriors fight, who bring their intelligence and their strategic vision and their network resources, and trust the kill team to translate those inputs into action in ways that the Inquisitor could not and should not try to dictate. The least successful are the ones who try to use their inquisitorial mandate to override kill team judgment in the field. These Inquisitors sometimes survive the experience. They do not always emerge from it with the same confidence in their approach. There is also the question of what the Ordo Xenos actually wants the Deathwatch to bring back from a mission. Kill and destroy is the simple version of the mandate. The full version includes recovering alien artifacts, specimens, intelligence materials, survivors in certain circumstances. The Ordo Xenos is not simply in the business of alien eradication. It is in the business of alien understanding. Because you cannot effectively destroy something you do not understand, and the process of understanding it sometimes produces knowledge that has value beyond the specific extinction operation. This produces ethical complexity. A kill team that has annihilated a Tyranid vanguard organism may be asked to recover biological samples from the wreckage. Reasonable. A kill team that has broken a Tau diplomatic mission may be asked to recover the mission's technical specifications for their communications technology. Operationally useful. A kill team that has found evidence of living specimens of a species the Ordo Xenos believes extinct may be asked to secure the specimens alive. That last request is where tensions escalate. Space Marines in the Deathwatch have been selected partly for their willingness to kill aliens efficiently and thoroughly. Being asked to not kill the alien, to treat it as an intelligence asset rather than a target, requires a different mode of operation. It is not impossible. The warriors who serve the long vigil are capable of restraint and judgment, but it is jarring. And not every kill team leader agrees with every Inquisitor's assessment of what a specific alien is worth alive versus dead. The Deathwatch navigates this tension continuously. It is part of what makes the institution unusual, the ongoing negotiation between the hunter's instinct and the intelligence operative's calculus, between the warrior who has sworn to destroy the alien and the organization that sometimes needs to study it before it is destroyed. There is one Ordo Xenos figure, encountered in the margins of various reports from different watch fortresses, who is described uniformly by the warriors who worked with her as the model of what a Deathwatch partnered Inquisitor should be. She is never named in the declassified materials. The reports describe her as a woman of middle apparent age who never appeared to be in a hurry, who always arrived at briefing sessions already knowing the operational picture and spent the briefing asking questions rather than delivering instructions, who had a habit of referring to alien entities by names she had apparently given them personally. Her kill teams returned from operations she had designed with extraordinarily high success rates and notably lower casualty rates than the norm for comparable missions. When asked what her secret was, she is reported to have said, "I respect them. Not the aliens, I respect my warriors. I know what they know that I do not. And I ask." That is the relationship the Deathwatch functions best under. Mutual respect between operators with different expertise. The alien as the shared problem. The partnership as the tool with which the shared problem is addressed. It does not always look like this, but when it does, what the partnership produces is something quite exceptional. Not everyone comes back. There is a category of Deathwatch warrior that the organization acknowledges but does not explain, at least not to outsiders. They are called Black Shields. And what they are is the most extreme version of what the long vigil can produce, or rather of what some warriors choose to make of it. The standard arrangement is secondment. A warrior serves for an indeterminate time, fulfills the requirements the watch commander determines, and returns to his chapter carrying the oath of silence and the experience of the long vigil. This is the expectation. This is what chapter masters agree to when they release warriors for Deathwatch service, and what the warriors themselves typically anticipate when they take the oath. Some do not return. Not because they die, though mortality in the watch is high, and some warriors serve and die in service, and this is honored as a death in the Imperium's most demanding service rather than mourned as a loss. The ones who do not return, in the way that matters here, are the ones who choose not to. The ones who, at the end of their service or partway through it, decide that they are not going back to their chapter, that they are staying, that the Deathwatch is not a temporary posting but a permanent home, or at least the closest thing to home that they will accept. These warriors remove the last marker of their chapter identity. The right pauldron, the one that was kept, the one that symbolized what they were before and what they would return to, comes off. They replace it with the Deathwatch's own iconography. Both shoulders now carry the watch's marking. The chapter they came from is erased from their visible identity, not by anyone's order but by their own hand. They become Black Shields. The reasons for this choice are as varied as the warriors who make it. Some have been in the Deathwatch long enough that returning to their chapter would mean returning to a community that has moved on, battles fought without them, promotions made without them, relationships that require a shared history they no longer have. The chapter they left is not the chapter they would return to, and they have changed too much for the return to be what they once imagined it would be. The watch is what they know. The watch is what they are good at. The watch is where they stay. Some left circumstances that made them unwilling to go back. Personal failures or shames that the Deathwatch's service allowed them to escape. The warrior who requested the long vigil not because it was offered, but because he needed to be somewhere else. Somewhere he could define himself by his mission rather than by whatever had happened in his chapter before. The long vigil as a form of self-imposed exile transformed over time into genuine belonging. Some simply found in the Watch something they had not found elsewhere. A community that values them not for their chapter lineage or their genetic heritage, but for what they are right now, today, for the expertise they have developed and the judgment they have earned, and the combination of capabilities that makes them valuable to the kill team they serve in. In a galaxy of institutions built on heritage and tradition, and the weight of 10,000 years of accumulated identity, the Deathwatch judges its warriors by what they do. For some, that is profoundly liberating, and some Black Shields carry secrets about their chapter, about their past, about circumstances that the Inquisition knows and the Deathwatch knows but that are not discussed. Warriors who cannot return for reasons that go beyond personal choice. Situations in which the chapter itself does not exist anymore. Consumed by a catastrophe that the warrior survived. Warriors who know things that make their presence in their chapter a liability to the chapter. Whose classified knowledge makes permanent posting to the Watch the most operationally sound solution for everyone involved. Warriors whose chapters have requested they not return, for reasons that the warrior and the Watch commander and the Ordo Xenos understand and that are classified at a level that protects everyone. The Black Shield does not owe anyone an explanation. This is the other side of what the designation means. Not just the removal of chapter identity, but the granting of something in its place. The Black Shield is not a warrior without a past. She is a warrior whose past is not available for discussion. And the Deathwatch protects that privacy as a matter of institutional principle. What matters is what the Black Shield contributes to the Watch's mission. The rest is nobody's business. In the field, a Black Shield is typically one of the more experienced warriors in any kill team she joins. The warrior who has chosen permanent service has by definition been in the Watch longer than the warriors on standard secondment, and the knowledge and skill that comes from extended service in the Deathwatch's operational environment is significant. Black Shields often serve as the institutional memory of a kill team, the one who has seen this kind of situation before, who knows the particular trap that this enemy tends to set at this stage of a mission, who has the pattern recognition that comes from having fought the same type of alien across a dozen different contexts over a decade of service. They are also, in some ways, the Watch's most committed members. They have chosen this, not under orders, not in fulfillment of a chapter obligation, but by their own decision. The warrior who stays when they could leave is the warrior who has decided that what the Watch does is the most important thing they can do with their existence, and that conviction burns in them with a specific steadiness that the warriors on temporary secondment, however skilled, cannot quite replicate. The Black Shield is the Deathwatch at its most complete expression. The warrior who has become what the Watch makes of those who give themselves to it entirely. And what the Watch makes, in these most committed of its servants, is something that is recognizably a Space Marine, but that is also something that no single chapter has ever produced. Something that is purely, only, the alien hunter. The Deathwatch kills aliens with unusual specificity, not because its warriors are more aggressive than those of other chapters, though they are not less aggressive. Not because the black armor carries some special protective quality, though the armor is maintained to the highest possible standard. The Deathwatch kills aliens with unusual specificity, because it has, over millennia of carefully documented engagement with every major Xenos species in the galaxy, developed weapons and ammunition and tactics calibrated to the precise biological and physical vulnerabilities of the things it fights. Most Space Marine forces are optimized for maximum effectiveness against the broadest possible threat spectrum. The Deathwatch is optimized for maximum effectiveness against alien anatomies and alien technologies. And the difference in performance against a target is measurable and significant. The bolter is the Space Marine's standard weapon, and the Deathwatch uses it too, but not with standard bolt rounds. The bolt guns carried by kill team members can be loaded with a range of specialized ammunition, whose varieties have been developed, modified, and refined over the Watch's history to address the full spectrum of Xenos threats. Kraken penetrators, hardened shells designed to defeat the natural armor of some Xenos species and the constructed armor of others, trading explosive yield for penetration depth. Against Necron warriors whose living metal bodies have shown the ability to absorb and deflect standard rounds, a Kraken penetrator reaches the system architecture underneath. Against Tyranids whose chitinous shells have been evolved specifically to resist ballistic impact, the penetrator gets through. Hellfire rounds, primarily developed for use against the Tyranid swarm, carrying a payload of mutagenic acid cocktail rather than a conventional explosive charge. A Hellfire round that penetrates the outer skin of a Tyranid organism begins breaking down the biological systems inside almost immediately. Against large creatures whose mass makes them resistant to conventional explosive damage, the acid does work that a standard explosion cannot. Against the Tavegan, the enormous brood mother organism that generates fresh termagant bodies during a battle, a volley of Hellfire rounds can end the creature's breeding function in seconds, fundamentally altering the tactical situation on the ground. Vengeance rounds, the close-range option, trading penetration and range for explosive devastation at short distance. Against orcs, whose physical resilience allows them to absorb punishment that would destroy most organisms and continue fighting, the close-range devastation of a vengeance round produces results that more distant and precise fire cannot. The orc that takes a vengeance round at 5 meters is not getting back up. The orc that takes a standard round at 50 meters often is. Dragonfire rounds, shaped to spray shrapnel in a specific pattern on detonation, optimized for clearing enclosed spaces of the kinds of small, fast-moving organisms that infest certain Xenos environments. Against Tyranid hormagaunts operating in tunnel complexes, against Tau drone clusters in confined corridors, against the biological servants of certain Necron lords whose architectural preferences run to narrow passages and tight corners. The Dragonfire round does not need to hit the target precisely. It needs to arrive in the same approximate space. The Stalker bolt gun is the Deathwatch's designated precision engagement weapon, a long-range, suppressed variant of the standard bolt gun that allows kill team members to operate with a degree of acoustic subtlety that standard weapons do not permit. In a galaxy where some Xenos species navigate primarily by sound, and where many of the most important kill team targets are individuals who must be removed without triggering the broader response that a firefight would produce, the Stalker is not a marginal capability. It is, in certain operational contexts, the most important weapon on the team. Beyond the ammunition, the Deathwatch's kill teams are equipped with a range of specialist tools that reflect the operational environments they enter. Melter weapons appear with higher frequency in Deathwatch loadouts than in most Space Marine forces, because the Melter's ability to defeat material resistance at the fundamental level, melting through rather than punching through, makes it effective against the synthetic resistance of Necron construction and the organic resilience of Tyranid biology alike. Flame weapons, similarly, have a place in the Deathwatch's toolkit not simply as fire support, but as a specific answer to the biological mass of Tyranid swarm creatures that can absorb projectile fire indefinitely but cannot regenerate burned organic material on a combat timescale. The Corvus Blackstar is the Deathwatch's dedicated transport aircraft, and its existence reflects how seriously the Watch takes the operational requirement of getting a kill team to its objective undetected and extracting it afterward. The Corvus Blackstar is not simply a transport, it is a purpose-built infiltration platform, with active stealth systems calibrated to the sensor technologies of the major Xenos species the Deathwatch fights. It can insert a kill team through a Tyranid bioship corridor, through a Tau detection network, into the airspace above a contested world and get out again. It is small, fast, and quiet, and it has a weapon system capable of providing the kill team with fire support if the situation deteriorates past the point that silence is productive. And then there is the knowledge base, the archives of every Watch fortress, the classified intelligence accumulated across millennia of engagement with alien species, the biological and technical analyses that the Ordo Xenos' scholars have produced from specimens and artifacts that kill teams have recovered at considerable cost. The Deathwatch warrior arrives at a mission not simply with superior weaponry, but with a briefing that tells them exactly what they are fighting and exactly which vulnerability they are going to target. The warrior who knows that the Necron Immortals' repair protocols can be disrupted by sufficient electromagnetic interference to a specific joint structure has an advantage that the warrior who does not know this lacks. The warrior who knows the precise biochemical composition of the acid that will most effectively break down a Tyranid synapse creature's neural tissue is not fumbling in the dark. She is executing a plan based on evidence, and the evidence has been gathered by everyone who has fought this specific enemy before her. This is the other weapon system of the Deathwatch. Not the bolter and the melter and the Corvus Blackstar, but the 10,000 years of death and study and documentation that tells the warrior holding the bolter where to point it. It is the most important weapon they carry, and they carry it in a chapter-sized archive, accumulated at the cost of more lives than the record can count. The Deathwatch's structure is not the Codex Astartes structure, and the deliberate deviation from the Codex is one of the more significant institutional statements the organization makes about what it is. A standard Space Marine chapter organizes around companies, roughly 100 warriors each, commanded by a captain, formed into the 10-company structure that the Codex prescribes as the default arrangement for a 1,000-warrior force. The companies have defined roles. The first company of veterans, the reserve companies, the scout company. The hierarchy is clear. The command relationships flow in predictable directions. The Codex exists precisely to make the organization legible, predictable, and therefore reliable. The Deathwatch has watch fortresses. It has kill teams. Between the kill team and the watch fortress, there are watch captains who command individual missions or clusters of related missions. And above the watch commander there are watch masters, senior figures of the organization whose authority extends beyond a single fortress, and who coordinate Deathwatch operations across entire regions. The Watchmaster for a given theater is the warrior who holds the broadest picture, who sees how the individual fortress operations relate to one another and to the larger strategic situation, and who makes the decisions about where to prioritize limited resources against a threat environment that has more demands than available response. The Watchmasters operate in concert with the most senior Ordo Xenos figures, the Inquisitor Lords, whose authority and experience encompasses the widest possible strategic view. This relationship, at its best, produces the most sophisticated alien threat assessment available anywhere in the Imperium. The Watchmasters' accumulated operational intelligence, combined with the Inquisitor Lords' network intelligence and strategic analytical capability, each informing the other, each expanding the picture that neither could produce alone. The chapters that contribute warriors to the Deathwatch maintain their relationship to the institution through a combination of formal obligation and informal culture. The formal obligation is the oath that each contributing chapter has sworn, the commitment to provide warriors when the Deathwatch calls, to maintain the pool of eligible candidates, to honor the secondment arrangement. The informal culture is the tradition that each chapter has built up around Deathwatch service over the centuries of its participation. The ceremonies that mark a warrior's departure, the reception that marks his return, the way each chapter understands what the long vigil means and what it produces in the warriors who go through it. Chapters with long Deathwatch traditions have refined these cultural elements over many generations, and the result is a relationship to the Watch that is part of the chapter's identity, a source of pride, of knowledge, of the particular quality that the chapter's veterans bring back from service. The Ultramarines' tradition of Deathwatch service goes back through centuries of engagement with Tyranid threats in the eastern reaches, and the knowledge that Ultramarine veterans have brought back from the Watch has shaped the chapter's anti-Xenos doctrine in ways that the chapter's own internal development could not have produced. The same is true in different form for the Scythes of the Emperor, whose identity is inseparable from the Tyranid catastrophe that nearly destroyed them, and whose participation in the Deathwatch is driven by a ferocity of anti-Tyranid purpose that colors everything they do in the Watch. Some chapters have complex relationships with the institution. The Space Wolves have participated in the Deathwatch since the Watch's founding, but their cultural distinctiveness creates interesting friction with an organization that is built on the mixing of chapter identities. The Space Wolf is definitively a Space Wolf in a way that makes the standard Deathwatch assimilation more visibly complicated than it is with warriors from chapters whose identities are less emphatically expressed. Space Wolf veterans of the Watch tend to remain more obviously Space Wolves in their manner and their approach than most other chapter veterans, and kill teams that include them accommodate this rather than trying to smooth it away. The Space Wolf's way of fighting is his, and it is effective, and the kill team adapts to what works. The Dark Angels are another case. The Dark Angels maintain the Deathwatch relationship, and their veterans serve honorably and effectively. But the Dark Angels carry their secrets in a way that creates occasional tension with an organization that runs on intelligence sharing. The Dark Angel who is carefully not saying something in a briefing is a familiar presence to Watch commanders who have worked with them. The tension is managed rather than resolved. The Dark Angel's capability is not in question. Their full disclosure to the Watch's intelligence network is. What the chapters receive in return for what they give the Deathwatch is not simply the enhanced warriors who return. It is also through the indirect channel of the Watch's operations, a form of protection they could not purchase themselves. The kill team that disrupts a Tyranid vanguard organism seeding a world adjacent to a chapter's territory may prevent an infestation that would have consumed a generation of the chapter's recruitment pool. The watch fortress that maintains the intelligence picture on a sector's alien threats provides the chapter masters in that sector with strategic context that shapes their own deployment decisions. The Deathwatch is a shared asset of the chapters that participate in it, and the participation is not only an obligation but a form of insurance. The Watch also serves as a calibration. Chapters whose warriors return from the long vigil carry operational experience against enemies that their chapter's regular deployments may not include. And that experience prevents the kind of tactical obsolescence that can affect a chapter deeply focused on a single campaign theater. A Blood Angels company that has fought Chaos forces on a single war zone for a decade will fight Chaos forces exceptionally well. But if that chapter has warriors who have served in the Deathwatch against Tyranids, Necrons, and Tau, the chapter's broader tactical thinking benefits from perspectives that the single theater focus would not have produced. The Deathwatch is not a substitute for a chapter. It does not replace the chapter brotherhood, the Primarch inheritance, the traditions and the history and the specific identity that each chapter builds over centuries of existence. But it supplements all of those things in the warriors who carry its experience back to their chapters, in the intelligence it provides to the strategic picture that chapter masters operate from, in the operations it conducts that change the conditions in which chapters fight without the chapters necessarily knowing how the conditions changed. It is the organization behind the organizations. The force that works in the spaces that conventional forces leave empty. The watch that the galaxy's alien threats must contend with even when they cannot see it. Especially when they cannot see it. Among all the things the Deathwatch hunts, the Tyranids occupy a unique position, not simply because they are dangerous. Every Xenos threat the Watch faces is dangerous. The Deathwatch is not deployed against threats that are merely inconvenient, not simply because they are numerous. The Orcs are arguably more numerous in aggregate. The Necrons potentially more widely distributed. The Tyranids occupy a unique position because they are existential in a way that the other alien threats the Watch addresses are not. Every other alien civilization in the galaxy, however hostile, has something that functions like a stake in the existence of the galaxy itself. The Orcs need something to fight. The Tau need population space and the extension of their philosophical empire. Even chaos, which is not alien in the conventional sense, requires reality to push against. There is a pragmatic flaw on the level of destruction that most alien civilizations will actually pursue, because beyond a certain point you are destroying the thing you are competing for possession of. The Tyranids have no such flaw. The Tyranid hive fleets do not want the galaxy, they want its biomass. They want the organic material that stars and planets and living things represent, stripped from the environments they currently occupy and processed into the fuel that the fleet uses to grow more fleet with which to process more biomass. They are not competing with humanity for resources in the way that most competition operates. They are competing with humanity for the matter of which humanity is made. And the competition ends when one side ceases to exist as a biological entity. The hive mind does not negotiate. It does not recognize the categories that negotiation requires. It has no demands that could be met, no interests that could be appealed to, no individuals who could be reached. It is a hunger that happens to be organized. organized with a terrible efficiency that exceeds anything human military planning has been able to fully understand or predict, but hunger nonetheless. Against this, the Deathwatch brings its particular tools, and against this specific enemy, those tools have been refined over the decades of engagement with multiple hive fleets to a degree of specificity that is without parallel in any other area of the Watch's operations. The Tyranid threat forces the Deathwatch to think at two levels simultaneously. At the tactical level, what kills this particular organism, and what kills it efficiently enough that a 5-person kill team can address it before the swarm overwhelms them. At the strategic level, what is the hive mind doing? What stage of invasion is this? And what is the key node whose removal will alter the strategic picture in a way that raw attrition could never achieve? The Tyranid hive mind is the defining strategic fact. It connects every organism in a swarm through a psychic network that allows for coordination at a level no human military has achieved. The thousands of organisms that make up a Tyranid assault are not individuals making individual tactical decisions, but expressions of a single will, and that will can redirect them in real time, without communication delay. Without the breakdown of command structure that attrition produces in human or orc or tau formations. You cannot break a Tyranid assault by killing its commanders, because the swarm's command function is distributed across an entire fleet's worth of neural capacity. What you can do is disrupt the local connection. The synapse creatures, the Tyranids who serve as relay nodes for the hive mind's signal, including zoanthropes, Tyranid warriors and the enormous hive tyrant organisms, maintain the coherence of the swarm by sustaining the psychic link between the fleet above and the organisms on the ground below. Destroy a synapse creature, and the organisms in its immediate area lose the direction that the hive mind provides. They do not become inert. Tyranid organisms disconnected from the hive mind's signal default to the base directives hardwired into their biology, which generally means continued aggression toward the nearest living things. But they lose the tactical intelligence that makes the coordinated swarm so dangerous. They become individually terrible, but collectively chaotic. And chaos, even terrible chaos, is more manageable than the coherent alien tactical intelligence of a full hive mind connection. Kill teams targeting Tyranid infestations are therefore designed around synapse disruption, the hellfire rounds that break down biological systems, the melter weapons that defeat the largest organism's sheer mass through thermal rather than kinetic means, the targeting prioritization that identifies synapse creatures first, high-value bioforms second, swarm mass last. And alongside the weapons, the knowledge, the accumulated intelligence on Tyranid organism types, their roles, their capabilities, the subtle differences between a vanguard organism and a mature infestation, the difference between a world that is in the early stages of consumption and a world that is beyond the point where intervention can preserve what it was. This last distinction is one of the more terrible things the Deathwatch must make. A world in the early stages of Tyranid infestation can be defended. Potentially, the hive mind's connection is not yet fully established. The organism density is not yet overwhelming. A decisive intervention against key synapse creatures can disrupt the invasion enough to allow conventional military forces to mop up what remains. A world in the late stages of consumption cannot be saved in any meaningful sense. The biomass extraction is too far advanced. What the Deathwatch can do at that stage is gather intelligence about the Hive Fleet's composition and capabilities, recover any surviving intelligence assets, and potentially strike at elements of the fleet itself. Not to defeat the fleet, which is beyond the capacity of a kill team, but to damage it in ways that matter for the next world the fleet approaches. The Deathwatch warrior who fights the Tyranids over years of service develops a particular relationship with what the hive mind represents. The hive mind is not something that can be frightened or deceived or appealed to. It cannot be convinced that war is counterproductive. It cannot be offered a deal. It is, in the most complete sense available, an alien intelligence. Alien not just in origin, but in the fundamental structure of what it wants and how it pursues the wanting. And facing something like that, year after year, develops in the warriors who survive it a quality that is hard to name from outside. A grimness, a seriousness that goes past the standard Astartes acceptance of the galaxy's darkness. The warrior who has watched a world be eaten, who has seen what the Tyranids leave behind, which is the specific horror of recognizing the absence of something that should be there, carries that watching in a way that shapes every subsequent engagement. Not despair. The Deathwatch warriors who fall to despair leave the watch, one way or another, but something beyond ordinary grimness. An understanding of what the stakes actually are when the Hive Fleet's advance is charted on the strategic map, and what happens to everything in that advance's path. The Tyranids are the alarm that never stops ringing. The Deathwatch is the force that stands in the path and says, not yet, not this world, not today. They know they are not winning the fight in the sense of ending it. They are buying time, and they buy it knowingly, and go back to buy more of it, and this too is something the galaxy does not produce in its warriors, by accident. The Necrons do not die. This is not quite true, and the nuance matters enormously if you are the warrior facing one. Necron warriors can be destroyed. Their bodies can be disrupted beyond the capacity of their repair protocols to rebuild. And when that happens, the animating energy of what they are departs, and the physical body fails. But the threshold for this is dramatically higher than anything comparable in organic opponents, and the manner in which Necron bodies resist and recover from damage has required the Deathwatch to develop an entirely different framework for what killing something means when you are fighting a Necron. A Necron warrior hit by standard bolter-fire will, if the shot does not destroy sufficient physical structure in a single impact, begin repairing itself, not slowly, not in the way that some organisms can regenerate damage over time given sufficient biological resources, almost immediately, the living metal of which the Necron body is constructed flowing back into the damaged configuration, in a process that the most sophisticated mechanicum analysis has struggled to fully characterize. The warrior who shoots a Necron and moves on to the next target may find, 30 seconds later, that the Necron she shot is standing behind her, against an enemy whose materials properties include the ability to unmake damage done to them. The question of what weapons you use takes on a different character. Overheating and electrical disruption are effective in ways that kinetic damage is not. The Kraken penetrator that might merely be repaired away does less work than an electrified weapon that disrupts the fundamental systems rather than simply damaging the shell. Melter weapons, which attack at the molecular level and produce temperatures that the living metal's repair protocols cannot immediately process, are among the most effective tools the Deathwatch deploys against Necron forces. But the Necron threat is not primarily a material problem. It is a strategic one. And understanding the strategic dimension requires understanding what the Necrons actually are, which requires going back further in the galaxy's history than any other Xenos threat the Watch faces. The Necrons were old before humanity developed writing. They were old when the ancestors of the Eldar were developing their first civilization. They are the remnants of a species that achieved technological mastery over the galaxy at an era so distant that the geological record of inhabited worlds does not reliably extend to it. A species that built an empire of stars and then, through a specific catastrophic choice made at the apex of that empire, surrendered their biological bodies for mechanical ones in exchange for immortality. The price of the exchange was everything that was not immortality. The Necrons lost the warmth of biological life, the passions and connections and drives that come with organic existence, while retaining, in varying degrees depending on the individual's status before the transfer, the core of their consciousness. The nobility retained more. The warrior castes retained less. What all of them retained was the imperative written into them at the transfer, the tomb protocols, the great sleeping, the eventual return. They have been returning in increasing numbers across the centuries of the current era. Tomb complexes that have lain inert for 60 million years activating as their internal chronometers reach the programmed wake-up point, or as the disturbances of the current age trigger emergency awakening protocols. Necron lords and overlords and pharaohs emerging from their crypts to assess a galaxy they last saw before the Tyranids arrived, before the Eldar's fall, before everything that is. The galaxy they find is not the galaxy they remember, and they are processing this with the specific unhurriedness of beings who are not in any hurry because they are not going to run out of time. Some of them want what the Necrons have always wanted, the restoration of their former empire, the reclamation of tomb worlds that other species have occupied in their long absence, the eventual subjugation or elimination of the biological species that have had the poor judgment to establish themselves on Necron claimed territory. Some of them have more complicated agendas, driven by the specific erosion of personality that the long sleep has produced in Necron consciousness. Some overlords have developed fixations or obsessions that make their behavior less predictable than the standard protocol would produce. Against this, the Deathwatch operates at the strategic level as much as the tactical one, disrupting a Necron awakening before the full strength of the tomb complex comes online, targeting the command nodes, the overlords and lords who provide the strategic direction for Necron forces, rather than attriting the warrior caste which can be repaired. Recovering and studying Necron technology that might illuminate the nature of specific tomb complexes, and allow the Ordo Xenos to predict when and where the next awakening will occur. This last mission is among the most classified in the Watch's operational portfolio. What the Ordo Xenos knows about Necron technology, about the specific capabilities of different dynasties, about the individuals who have awakened in various regions and what they want. This intelligence is extraordinarily sensitive because some of it suggests possibilities that the Imperium's official theology cannot accommodate. Possibilities about what the Necrons were, and what the things they destroyed were, and what relationship exists between the current Xenos threat and the deep history of the galaxy's stars. The Deathwatch warrior who serves against Necrons for long enough encounters evidence that raises questions, big questions. Questions about the nature of the Emperor's project, about what humanity's relationship to the galaxy's deep history actually is, about whether the Necrons' view of the current era as a temporary interruption in an order they will eventually reassert is simply alien arrogance or something more uncomfortable. Most warriors do not pursue these questions. They are trained to fight, not to philosophize about the nature of the enemy's historical claim to the galaxy. But the questions exist, and the Deathwatch's classification of the relevant intelligence suggests that the Ordo Xenos takes the possibility that the answers are destabilizing quite seriously. The Necrons are the enemy you cannot defeat the way you defeat other enemies. You cannot exhaust them or outlast them, or break their will to fight. You can disrupt them, delay them, cut away their leadership, force them back into dormancy in situations where their awakening can be contained. You can win individual battles against them, often at significant cost. You cannot, in any currently foreseeable scenario, win the war. This is not unique to the Necrons. The Deathwatch operates in the full knowledge that the alien threats it addresses are not going away, and that its role is containment rather than extermination in most cases. But the Necron situation has a particular quality to it, a deep time weight that the other threats do not carry. The Tyranids are a recent arrival in cosmic terms, an external threat driving inward. The Orcs are endemic, everywhere, impossible to exterminate as a species. The Tau are expanding but young. The Necrons have already ruled this galaxy. They are simply in the process of returning to what they consider theirs. How the Deathwatch stands against something that thinks of itself as returning rather than invading is one of the more philosophically acute problems the Watch's doctrine has had to address. The answer it has arrived at through millennia of engagement is this: it does not matter what the Necrons think of themselves. What matters is that they are a threat to human life, and the Deathwatch's mandate covers all threats to human life. And the Necron can be fought even if the Necron cannot ultimately be defeated in any final sense. You fight what is in front of you. That is the answer. It is not a satisfying answer, in the way that philosophy is satisfied, but it keeps warriors alive and keeps worlds from being repossessed by their 60-million-year-old previous owners, and in the Deathwatch, that suffices. The Tau are, by some metrics, the most unusual enemy the Deathwatch faces. Not the most dangerous, the Tyranid Hive Fleet and the awakening Necron Tomb complexes both represent greater immediate existential threat in their respective theaters, but unusual, in the way that makes the warrior pause and think about what killing something actually means when the thing has a philosophy. The Tau believe in something called the greater good. This is not a martial code or a warrior's creed in the way that Astartes culture understands such things. It is a genuine philosophical framework, a conception of how different species can relate to one another under the banner of a shared project. A project in which the Tau see themselves as the guides and eventual beneficiaries, but in which other species have a genuine place, a genuine role, a genuine stake. The Tau have absorbed other species into their sphere of influence not only through conquest but through genuine persuasion. And the species that have agreed to the Tauva have not in all cases regretted it. This creates a problem that the Orcs, the Necrons, and the Tyranids do not. You can kill a Tyranid without any moral complexity. The Tyranid is a biomass processor with evolutionary sophistication. It does not have the inner life that moral complexity requires. You can kill a Necron with whatever ambiguity their deep-time historical claim creates, and file it as a necessary action in defense of currently inhabited worlds. You can kill an orc because the orc is going to kill you regardless of your position on the philosophical dimensions of the conflict. The Tau offer something that none of these enemies offer, an alternative narrative. The possibility, which the Tau prosecute actively through diplomatic and propaganda, means that conflict with humanity is not inevitable, that a different kind of relationship is possible, that the Imperium's absolute xenophobia is not the only way for humanity to exist in the galaxy. The Deathwatch does not engage with this alternative narrative. Its mandate is alien eradication, not alien diplomacy. And the Tau's philosophical framework, however sophisticated, does not change the strategic reality that Tau expansion is occurring at the expense of Imperial territory. Each sphere of expansion that the Tau conduct claims worlds that were or are nominally Imperial, incorporates populations that were Imperial, and creates a strategic situation in which human beings are no longer governed by human institutions. Whether this is worse than being governed by the current human institutions is a question that the Deathwatch is not in the business of asking. The warriors who serve the long vigil have sworn to fight for the Imperium's survival, not to audit the quality of Imperial governance relative to Xenos alternatives. But the Tau fight differently from the other enemies the Watch faces, and this requires different approaches. The Tau military, the Firecast, is technologically sophisticated, disciplined and deeply integrated with drone support and long-range fire systems that make direct engagement at close range the least desirable outcome for Tau commanders. They maintain distance, saturate targets with high-volume fire, leverage the sensor superiority of their drone networks to see engagement spaces before they enter them, and conduct their wars with a rational efficiency that makes them very good at not being in the same place as things that want to kill them. Against this, kill teams that rely on the straightforward assault approach that works against orc forces are not optimized. The Tau approach requires matching subtlety with subtlety, infiltration past the drone network, the elimination of command personnel whose removal disrupts the coordination that makes Tau forces effective, the targeting of the systems that give the Firecast its information advantage. It is closer to the intelligence-led precision work of countering the Necrons than to the brute annihilation required against the Tyranid swarm. The Orcs require yet another framework, and it is in some ways the simplest, finding and eliminating the war boss. Not because this kills the Orcs, it does not, in any lasting sense. The biological reality of the greenskin species means that Orcs will fight regardless of whether there is a leader directing them, and a Warg with a decapitated command structure simply produces a new command structure from the most physically dominant Orc remaining, through a process of violence that is rapid, decisive, and completely indifferent to the external strategic situation. But eliminating the war boss does disrupt the War's cohesion at the moment of elimination, creates a period of infighting and reorientation during which conventional forces can engage the fragments more effectively than they could engage the coherent whole, and sometimes prevents the strategic objectives the war boss was pursuing. Killing an Orc war boss is harder than it sounds. They are enormous. They are biologically resilient in ways that make standard engagement profiles inadequate, and they are surrounded by their best warriors, who have achieved the status of best warriors by surviving things that killed every other Orc who tried. and who are therefore not easily dispatched. The kill team that takes a warboss assignment is not going to do it from a comfortable distance with precision weapons. It is going to go into the Orc's presence, at close range, in conditions where the Orc's numbers would overwhelm a conventional force. And it is going to kill the warboss before the warboss's attendants can respond to the threat in an organized way. This is brutal, dangerous, and when it works, decisive. When it doesn't work, it is very unpleasant indeed. Beyond the major species, Tyranid, Necron, Tau, Orc, the Deathwatch faces the full spectrum of what the galaxy's xenobiology has produced. The Eldar, whose relationship with the Imperium is complicated enough that the Deathwatch sometimes works alongside them and sometimes targets them, depending on the nature of the craft world and the situation. Dark Eldar raiding parties that target Imperial populations for its purpose of harvesting living people for their own cultural practices. A threat the Deathwatch addresses not only with violence, but with the intelligence work that makes it possible to anticipate and intercept raids before they reach their targets. Genestealer cults, which are Tyranid infiltration in a different form, smaller and more surgical than the Hive Fleet, but capable of corrupting an entire planetary government before the infection is recognized. The galaxy's darkness is not uniform. It comes in different shapes, from different directions, with different intentions and different capabilities. The Deathwatch addresses it all, one kill team at a time, adapting the framework to the specific enemy, rather than expecting the enemy to accommodate the framework. This is what the alien hunt actually looks like, spread across the full spectrum of what the Watch faces. Not a single war against a single enemy, but dozens of different wars against dozens of different kinds of minds, fought with the tools and knowledge that each one requires. It is more complicated than fighting human enemies. It is more demanding, in the sense of requiring more kinds of expertise deployed more precisely. And it is, in a way that the warriors who do it best seem uniformly to feel, more important. Because the human enemies the Imperium fights are enemies within the story of human civilization. The alien threats are something else, challenges to whether that story continues at all. The Jericho Reach is the most complete available illustration of what the Deathwatch faces when the galaxy's threats are not politely sequential. Most regions deal with one primary Xenos pressure at a time. The Jericho Reach, which the Achilles Crusade has been attempting to reclaim for the Imperium since M41, deals with three simultaneously, and the Watch Fortress Erioch stands at the center of all of it, trying to maintain a strategic picture that should, by any reasonable assessment, be too complex to hold in a single intelligence framework. The Hive Fleet Dagon is the Tyranid threat in the Reach, not one of the major Hive fleets by comparison to Behemoth, Kraken or Leviathan, but substantial enough to be consuming worlds in what the local commanders have named the Orpheus salient of the Crusade. Dagon behaves in the particular way that Hive fleets behave when they are operating at the edge of their synapse coverage, opportunistically targeting the isolated and the weakened, probing for the gaps in Imperial resistance that the overextended Achilles Crusade creates as it tries to advance on multiple fronts simultaneously. The Tau are in the Reach from a different direction. They arrived in what the Crusade discovered was already a contested region. Tau exploration and expansion had preceded the Imperial return to the Reach, and the specific star systems that were to be reclaimed in the name of the Emperor were already in some cases incorporating into the Tau sphere of influence. The collision between Imperial reclamation and Tau expansion produced the engagement zone that Deathwatch kill teams from Erioch operate in, fighting a war that is not simply about military control of systems, but about the ideological contest between a human Imperium telling human populations they are being liberated, and a Tau empire explaining to those same populations that they already had. Quite a reasonable arrangement. And in the foundations of the Reach, the Necrons. Ancient tomb complexes that predate the Crusade, that predate the Tau's first interest in the region, that have been activating at irregular intervals with increasing frequency as the strategic disturbances of the current era filter through whatever monitoring systems maintain the awakening protocols. Deathwatch teams dispatched into the deeper parts of the Reach have returned with intelligence about Necron presences that the Crusade command structure has been carefully not discussing in its broader strategic communications. Because the nature and scale of what is activating in those older parts of the Reach would be deeply problematic for the Crusade's morale if it were widely known. In this context, Watch Fortress Ariok operates not as a fortress in the standard military sense, but as a hub of organized response. Kill teams rotated through Ariok do not have the luxury of a single enemy focus that most Deathwatch deployments permit. They need to be adaptable across threat types, capable of shifting from anti-Tyranid operations in one salient to anti-Tau precision work in another, and intelligence gathering against Necron activations in a third, often within the span of a single deployment cycle. This is the Deathwatch at maximum operational demand. Warriors who arrive at Ariok expecting the discipline-specific focus of a single enemy theater find instead a strategic environment where the knowledge they brought from their home chapters is valuable but insufficient, where the Watch's accumulated intelligence on all three threats is essential, and where the judgment required to operate effectively in conditions of genuine three-way complexity requires an adaptability that even veteran kill teams sometimes need time to develop. Ariok's kill teams have done remarkable things. The disruption of a Tyranid synapse network in the Celebos war zone that bought the Imperial Guard defending the planet enough time to fortify a secondary line before the full swarm weight arrived. The elimination of a Tau ethereal, the enigmatic leaders of Tau society whose loss the intelligence suggested would significantly disrupt Tau strategic planning in the Reach. An operation that required weeks of preparation and infiltration work by a 3-warrior cell, conducted entirely in Tau-occupied territory. The sealing of a Necron tomb complex entrance on a world that the Crusade had been trying to hold, preventing the emergence of a force that the Crusade forces on the surface could not have survived. These are not the operations that the Crusade's official history celebrates. The Achilles Crusade, like all Imperial military operations, maintains records designed for posterity that emphasize the heroism of the visible forces, the Guard regiments, the Allied chapters, the battles fought and won by forces whose presence is acknowledged. The Deathwatch's contributions are in the classified appendices, if they are recorded at all. A kill team operation that changes the strategic situation is typically experienced by the wider force as an unexplained improvement in conditions. The enemy pressure that inexplicably reduced before the next major engagement, the intelligence that arrived about enemy positioning with no explanation of its source, the objective that was mysteriously no longer defended when the assault force arrived. This invisibility is not accidental. The Deathwatch's effectiveness partly depends on the enemy not knowing what the Deathwatch is doing or how. A Tau commander who understands that ethereals are being targeted will change how ethereals are protected. A Tyranid hive mind, to the extent that it processes information about threats in ways that produce adapted tactical responses, will alter synapse creature deployment if it recognizes a pattern of synapse targeting. The Deathwatch operates in the spaces the enemy does not know to look at, and the enemy only stops looking at those spaces if the Deathwatch does not draw attention to the fact that those are the spaces being exploited. So the history of the Deathwatch's greatest achievements lives in classified archives, described in operational reports written for internal review and not for the public record, known to the warriors who participated and the inquisitors who directed and the watch commanders who approved, and sealed against the kind of wider dissemination that would make them informative to the wrong readers. The galaxy's alien threats have been turned back in moments that the galaxy does not know happened, have been disrupted in key nodes by warriors whose names do not appear in the histories. The decision to contain rather than publicly defeat, the choice to win quietly rather than win visibly, is one of the most difficult things about the Deathwatch's institutional culture. For warriors who are, at root, proud of what they do and what they sacrifice to do it, they take the quiet victories, they accept the invisibility, and they go back to the Watch Fortress and read the briefs for the next mission, and the mission after that, and they do not stop. The long vigil is called long for a reason. There is no standard tour of Deathwatch service. A warrior who asks his watch commander when his service will end is not asking a question that has a scheduled answer, because the answer depends on factors that a schedule cannot capture. The operational need, the warrior's performance, the missions for which his skills are required, and the watch commander's judgment about when the Deathwatch has received what it needs from this particular warrior and can release him back to his chapter. Some warriors serve for a year, some serve for a decade, some serve for a generation, and some stay longer than that. And at some point along the longer end of that spectrum, the question of what return means becomes genuinely complicated. A space marine who has served in the Deathwatch for 10 years has experienced things that his chapter cannot adequately contextualize. He has fought enemies that most of his chapter brothers have encountered only in briefing materials. He has operated under the Inquisition's authority in ways that produce a different relationship to institutional hierarchy than standard chapter service does. He has killed alongside warriors from chapters that his chapter might not think of as natural allies, and he has built real bonds with some of those warriors, and he has carried the deaths of others. He has operated in the spaces between conventional engagement and the kind of clandestine action that most warriors never approach. He comes home different. The chapter receives him as a veteran of something they know only at a distance. The long vigil is celebrated in the traditions of most chapters as an honor, and the warrior who returns from it is honored accordingly. But the actual shape of what he has been through, the content of what he has done and seen, is sealed under the oath. He can say he served. He cannot say what he learned. He can bring his enhanced capabilities to the chapter's campaigns. He cannot explain in full why he approaches certain tactical situations the way he does, or what intelligence about their enemy's biology is informing his targeting choices, or why he insists on a particular approach to a Xenos engagement that his chapter's doctrine does not entirely account for. This is isolating in the way that carrying any significant sealed knowledge is isolating. He knows things that he cannot share with the people around him, and the things he knows have changed how he sees the galaxy, and he cannot entirely explain the seeing without reference to the knowing. The chapter is glad to have him back. He is glad to be back, but the person who returned and the community he returned to are not perfectly fitted to each other anymore. And the adjustment takes time, and in some cases the adjustment never quite completes. There is a phenomenon the Deathwatch records without giving it a name. The unofficial term used among warriors is the double bind, though the records simply describe it as adjustment difficulty in post-secondment integration. Warriors who have served extended Deathwatch tours sometimes find themselves restless in standard chapter deployments. The pace is different. The scale is different. The kind of mission they have been running, the 5-person insertion, the carefully planned precision strike, the weeks of intelligence-led preparation before a single operation that ends in minutes does not map onto the larger unit engagements of standard chapter warfare. The warrior who has spent years operating in kill teams of 5 to 15 finds himself in a company formation of 100, and the fit is wrong in ways he struggles to articulate. Some return to the Watch, not necessarily because they have chosen the permanent service of the Black Shield, but because the reintegration was difficult enough that when the Watch reaches out again, as it does, periodically, for warriors whose skills remain of value to its missions, the warrior does not decline. He goes back. He takes the oath again. He puts on the black armor again. Some of these warriors eventually become Black Shields without ever intending to. The years accumulate. The missions accumulate. The number of returns to the Watch exceeds the number of returns to the chapter, and at some point the calculation shifts, and the choice that is nominally about a mission becomes a decision about where home is. Others adjust, come back fully, find their place in the chapter again, bring what the long vigil gave them, the expertise, the adaptability, the judgment that comes from fighting enemies no single chapter fully understands, and contribute it to the chapter in ways that benefit everyone. These warriors are among the most valuable that a chapter can field in Xenos heavy operations, and chapters that have sent many warriors through the long vigil and received them back understand this. The Deathwatch's gift to the chapters is a form of expertise that cannot be replicated by internal training programs, because the experience that produces it is available only through service in the Watch itself. What the long vigil does to a warrior's relationship to the Xenos is perhaps the most interesting change it produces. A warrior who enters the Deathwatch carrying the standard Astartes relationship to alien species. Alien is enemy. Enemy is to be destroyed. The nature of the alien is relevant only to the extent that it informs how most efficiently to destroy it. Emerges carrying something more complex. Not sympathy for the alien, not the kind of fascinated cross-species appreciation that marks some of the more radical Ordo Xenos Inquisitors, but knowledge, real knowledge. The kind that changes what you see when you look at the enemy. The warrior who has studied Tau society closely enough to understand why the greater good is not simply propaganda, who can see the internal logic of the Tau philosophical framework even while opposing the expansion it drives, fights Tau forces differently from the warrior who knows only that they are the alien and must be destroyed. The warrior who understands the Tyranid synapse network at the level of studied biological analysis rather than simple observation kills synapse creatures more effectively, because he knows what he is disrupting and why the disruption matters. This is the paradox of the Deathwatch. The organization, built on the xenophobic certainty that the alien is the enemy, employs warriors who understand the alien better than any other humans in the galaxy. The warrior best equipped to destroy the alien is the warrior who knows it most completely. And knowing something completely is not entirely compatible with the uncomplicated hatred that the Imperial creed encourages toward the Xenos. The warriors manage this tension the way soldiers manage most philosophical tensions, by keeping it compartmentalist from the operational necessity of what they are there to do. The Tau have a philosophy, and the philosophy is interesting, and the warrior understands it, and when the mission requires engaging Tau forces, the warrior engages them with the specific effectiveness that understanding the philosophy enables. The understanding does not prevent the engagement, it makes the engagement more effective. This is the long vigil's final product, not the destruction of certainty or the creation of sympathy, but the production of knowledge. The deep, operational, life or death relevant knowledge of what the galaxy's other inhabitants are, what they want, and how most effectively to stop them getting it. That knowledge lives in the warriors who have carried it through the Watch, and in the archives that accumulate it, and it makes the difference between the Imperium facing the alien threat with tools calibrated to what the alien actually is, rather than to what the Imperium's theology says it should be. It costs. It changes the warriors who carry it. It creates complications that simpler organizations do not produce. And it is, despite everything, worth the cost. The Imperium does not approve of alien technology. This is stated categorically in the texts that govern Imperial doctrine on the subject. The use of xenotech, alien-designed, alien-manufactured technology, including artifacts recovered from alien species and devices adapted from alien principles, is explicitly forbidden under the Adeptus Mechanicus's interpretation of the Treaty of Mars, and under the broader framework of the Imperial Creed's position on what is proper for human beings to build and use. Xenos technology is tainted. It is produced by minds that do not think as human minds think, that do not understand the Omnissiah, that are building toward purposes the Imperium does not endorse. The machine spirit of an alien device is not a proper machine spirit. The tech priests do not bless alien machinery. The Mechanicus does not maintain it. The Ordo Xenos maintains a significant collection of it. This is not technically a contradiction of the stated doctrine, because the stated doctrine has footnotes that the Ordo Xenos has been interpreting expansively since the organization's founding. The footnotes allow for the recovery and study of alien technology for the purposes of understanding the threat it represents. In order to effectively counter alien weaponry, you need to understand how it functions. And you cannot understand how it functions without having examples of it. The Ordo Xenos interprets the permission to study as encompassing a great deal of activity that the standard interpretation of the prohibition would not permit, and the Inquisition's institutional authority makes it very difficult for other Imperial institutions to press the argument too far. The Deathwatch's kill teams regularly recover alien artifacts as part of their mission profile. A kill team that eliminates a Tau weapons platform may be tasked with retrieving the targeting system from the wreckage, because the Ordo Xenos wants to understand how the targeting system achieves the acquisition range it achieves. A kill team that breaks an Eldar raiding party may be asked to secure any of the ghost tech artifacts the raiders were carrying, because Eldar technology derived from Wraithbone operates on principles that the Ordo Xenos' most gifted scholars have been attempting to fully characterize for centuries. A kill team that reaches a Necron tomb complex before the Necrons have fully activated may be asked to recover whatever the Ordo Xenos' analysts have identified as most likely to yield intelligence about the tomb's configuration and capability. The warriors who do this are not, in their own understanding, violating the prohibition on xenotech. They are soldiers retrieving intelligence assets for their inquisitorial patron. The philosophical question of whether the artifact being carried in the kill team's equipment case on the way back to the Watch Fortress constitutes prohibited use of alien technology is a question for the Inquisition's theologians, not for the warrior in the field. But the warriors are not entirely unaware of what they are doing. There are kill teams who have returned from missions carrying artifacts that the team members have studied during the mission, not used in the traditional sense, but examined closely enough that the examination has informed tactical decisions in ways that the Prohibition's drafters would not have been comfortable with. A warrior who understands, from examination of recovered samples, that a specific Tyranid bioform's vulnerability lies in a particular neural cluster that can be disrupted by electromagnetic interference, and who uses that understanding to improve his targeting during the rest of the mission, has used knowledge derived from the alien artifact, blurring the line between study and use in ways the Prohibition's drafters never quite anticipated. The Ordo Xenos is aware of this blur. The more radical Inquisitors in the Ordo embrace it. The only way to fight the alien effectively is to understand the alien completely. And understanding completely means at some point using what you understand. The more conservative Inquisitors resist it, maintaining that the Prohibition exists for reasons that do not evaporate under operational pressure. That the machine spirits of alien devices are genuinely dangerous in ways that go beyond the practical risk of misuse. That allowing the blur to go unchecked is how you produce Inquisitors who are more interested in studying the Xenos than in destroying it. This internal debate is one of the more interesting ongoing tensions within the Ordo Xenos, and it surfaces in different forms in different watch fortresses depending on which Inquisitors are resident. Watch fortresses where radical Inquisitors predominate have kill team missions with broader recovery mandates, more extensive alien technology archives, and sometimes tactical doctrines that incorporate alien-derived knowledge in ways that more conservative fortresses would not sanction. Watch fortresses under more conservative inquisitorial direction prioritize destruction over recovery, maintain narrower archives, and watch their kill teams more closely for signs of what the conservative Inquisitors call xenophilia, the inappropriate fascination with the alien that they regard as a precursor to more serious compromise. The warriors in the kill teams navigate this ideological geography alongside the operational one. A warrior who has served under both types of inquisitorial oversight and survived the comparison has an education in the full range of what the Deathwatch's mission can mean, and develops his own position on where the line between useful knowledge and dangerous fascination actually lies. Most arrive at a pragmatic position. Know what you need to know to kill what you need to kill, and be suspicious of knowing beyond that point. The alien artifact is a tool for understanding, not a treasure in itself. The understanding it provides is valuable insofar as it translates into operational effectiveness against the enemy. The warrior who becomes more interested in the artifact than in the enemy it came from has, in the practical judgment of most kill team veterans, gone somewhere the mission doesn't need him to go. There is a note in the archives of Watch Fortress Ariok about a kill team that recovered a Necron artifact of unusual sophistication from a partially activated tomb complex in the Jericho Reach. The artifact was studied for several months by the Ordo Xenos scholars at the fortress, under conditions that the report describes as closely managed. At the end of the study period, the artifact was sealed and classified at the highest level the Watch commander could authorize. The report does not say why. It says only that the study produced insights of significant strategic relevance that were transmitted to the Ordo Xenos Inquisitor Lord at the time, and that subsequent operational planning in the Reach was appropriately adjusted in light of those insights. What the artifact was, what it told the Ordo Xenos, what the adjustment of operational planning entailed, none of this is in the declassified materials. The entry exists only to note that something happened, that what happened was significant, and that the appropriate people were informed. This is how the Deathwatch's relationship to alien knowledge often records itself, not in the substance of what was learned, but in the notation that learning occurred, and that what was learned mattered. The substance is too sensitive for the record. The record exists to establish that the process was followed correctly. What the process produced lives somewhere that most readers of the record will never reach. The most dangerous thing the Deathwatch knows is also the thing it protects most carefully. Not the locations of Watch fortresses, not the tactical doctrines it has developed, not even the intelligence on any specific alien threat currently active in that region. The most dangerous thing is the broader picture, the accumulated xenobiological and xenocultural knowledge that 10,000 years of engagement with every significant alien species in the galaxy has produced, and what that knowledge implies about the galaxy's history and future. The Ordo Xenos' scholars work with this knowledge every day. They are among the most comprehensively informed beings in the Imperium about what the galaxy actually contains, about what human beings are actually sharing the universe with, about the history that predates the human species. And what they know is not entirely consistent with the theology that the Imperium uses to organize its population's relationship to the cosmos. The Necron's age, for example. The Ordo Xenos knows, in the sense of having substantial evidence for, that the Necron civilization predates humanity by a margin that geological and astrophysical evidence struggles to accommodate in the standard Imperial timeline. The Necrons remember a galaxy that the Emperor himself cannot have seen, that no human record extends to, and the Necrons, in their archival systems and their ancient records, and the specific cultural references their overlords make in interactions with Ordo Xenos personnel, describe things about the galaxy's history that suggest the current moment, the age of humanity, the age of the Emperor, the age of the Imperium, is not the culmination of anything. It is an interlude. Not maliciously, the Necrons do not believe this as a political position designed to undermine the Imperium. They believe it in the simple way that a geological record believes in the age of the strata, as a statement of how much time has passed and what that time contained. The Necron overlord who remarks, in conversation with an Ordo Xenos Inquisitor, that the star systems now called the Segmentum Obscurus were once the heart of a specific dynasty's territory, is not making a threat. It is making an observation about where it is. The way a person returning home after a long absence might note that someone has built something in what used to be their garden. The implications of this kind of knowledge for the Imperium's theological framework are significant enough that the Ordo Xenos does not circulate it freely. The Imperial Creed positions humanity as the galaxy's proper inheritor, the species for which the stars were made. To put it in the most theologically explicit version, the evidence that the galaxy's most ancient surviving civilization considers humanity a recent arrival, whose presence represents an occupation of territory that was already someone else's, is the kind of information that, distributed without context and without the full analytical framework that the Ordo Xenos has built around it, would be deeply destabilizing. The Tyranids present a different kind of unsettling knowledge. The deeper the Ordo Xenos' understanding of the Hive Fleet's nature grows, the more it becomes clear that the Tyranids' approach to this galaxy is not simply hunger, it is recognition. The hive mind, in its processing of the galaxy's biological content, appears to be responding to something specific about what this galaxy contains. The volume of biomass, the density of psychic potential. The Tyranid invasion is not random, it is directed. And the direction suggests that the things attracting Tyranid attention are not incidental features of the current era, but something more fundamental about what the galaxy is. The Ordo Xenos does not know what that fundamental thing is. This is, in itself, disturbing. The organization built on knowing the alien has, on this specific question, reached the limits of its current knowledge. The evidence says something is attracting the hive. The evidence does not say what. The most carefully considered theories that the Ordo Xenos' best analysts have produced are classified at levels that would make most inquisitors blanch. And the theories themselves are hedged with enough uncertainty that even the people who believe them most strongly describe them as working hypotheses rather than conclusions. The Eldar bring yet another dimension. The Eldar remember the time before their fall, the Golden Age, the height of their civilization, the period before the Chaos God of Excess was born in the psychic catastrophe of their civilization's excess and destroyed most of what they were. And the Eldar who will talk, not all of them will, and the ones who will have their own agendas for doing so, describe that history in ways that illuminate the current era differently than the Imperium's framework does. The relationship between the Eldar's Golden Age and humanity's current moment, between the fall and the human species' emergence as a psychic presence in the warp, between what happened to the Eldar and what the Ordo Xenos is currently watching happen to humanity's warp relationship in the era Indomitus. The connections exist, and the Ordo Xenos' scholars trace them in their classified analyses. What the connections mean is again not settled. The galaxy's history is too vast and too ancient and too damaged by the losses of information that cosmic catastrophe produces for anyone to hold the complete picture. But the Ordo Xenos holds more of it than any other institution in the Imperium. And the Watch Fortresses, as the operational arm of the Ordo Xenos' alien engagement program, generate a significant portion of the evidence from which those pictures are assembled. The Deathwatch warrior who goes on a mission and comes back with a Necron artifact does not know what the scholars will ultimately make of it. The kill team leader who records an Eldar Farseer's final words before the mission concludes does not know what the Ordo Xenos analyst will find in them that is relevant to the strategy of the next decade. The intelligence that flows from engagement into analysis and from analysis into strategic planning is not fully legible at any single point in the chain. But it accumulates. Everything the Watch does, from the after-action report on the smallest kill team operation to the interrogation records of the most significant alien intelligence assets the Ordo Xenos has handled, accumulates into a picture of the galaxy that is, in aggregate, the most complete and most sensitive intelligence picture available. The Deathwatch exists to kill the alien. In killing it, the Deathwatch also learns it. And in learning it, the Deathwatch builds the weapon that is not Bolter or Melter or Corvus Blackstar, but something more durable than any of these. The understanding of what the alien actually is, and what it means for what the galaxy actually is, and what humanity must actually become to survive in the galaxy that the understanding reveals. Not a comfortable weapon, not a clean one, but 10,000 years of killing the alien have not produced another one. And the Deathwatch uses what it has. The long vigil continues. Let us follow a kill team on a mission. Not a specific named team, the named operations are sealed, and the specific details are the Ordo Xenos' to keep. But the shape of the thing, the texture of what a kill team does from the moment the mission is assigned to the moment, if there is a moment, when the survivors return. The briefing begins weeks before deployment, and for the kill team leader it begins earlier than that, with the intelligence package that the Watch Fortress's analysts have assembled from every source available. From orbital surveys to agent reports to the accumulated tactical records of previous kill teams that have operated in the target area or against the specific enemy, the leader reads it all. Not because she will remember every detail in the field, but because the process of reading it creates a picture of the operational environment that instinct can reference even when explicit memory cannot. The leader who has absorbed the intelligence deeply enough knows, when something in the field looks wrong, that it looks wrong before she can articulate why. The kill team assembles from the available personnel at the fortress. The Watch Commander is involved in this selection, and so is the Ordo Xenos Inquisitor, who is the mission's patron. The conversation about who goes is a professional one. Not competitive, not political, but calibrated. This mission needs someone who understands Tyranid synapse architecture at a molecular level. This mission needs someone who can infiltrate a Tau outpost undetected. This mission needs Terminator armor for the conditions this objective demands. The selection is made, the warriors are briefed, and the formal assembly of the team begins. The team members who have not served together before, which is usually most of them, have a day or two of operational coordination before deployment. Not extensive training, they are already trained, and the time is too short for the intensive cross-familiarization that would be ideal. It is more focused than that, agreeing on terminology, establishing the communication protocols, walking through the mission plan together until everyone understands not just their own role, but enough of everyone else's that they can adapt if circumstances change. And circumstances will change. In the field, the plan never entirely survives contact with reality, and the kill team that has only ever discussed its own plan and not the underlying logic of it is the kill team that seizes up when the plan needs to be abandoned. The Corvus Blackstar takes them to the operational area, or a strike cruiser takes them close and the Blackstar deploys from there. The insertion is the first test, not of courage, which is not a variable in a team of veterans, but of the quiet kind of competence that doesn't show under easy conditions. how they manage the moment of deployment, the transition from the controlled environment of the transport to the uncontrolled environment of the mission itself, whether the information they have maps to what they find, whether the adjustments they have to make immediately are within the range of what the team's planning has prepared for. They move carefully. A kill team that makes noise is a kill team that gets responded to, and being responded to in the early stages of a mission means operating at a significant disadvantage relative to reaching the objective position before the enemy knows it is there. The Raven Guard veteran moves like something that has been trained to move in the dark, and the other team members match their pace to what the terrain and the threat environment will support, rather than what their own instincts about speed would prefer. In a Tyranid-infested environment, the biological sensors of the swarm creatures are the constraint. In a Necron-controlled complex, the electromagnetic monitoring systems are the constraint. In a Tau-held territory, the drone network is the constraint. The constraint shapes the movement. Observation before action, wherever possible. Arriving at an objective and attacking immediately, based purely on the intelligence received at the Watch Fortress, is how teams get surprised by things the intelligence didn't cover. Take time, as much time as the mission parameters allow, to watch, to confirm what the intelligence says, to notice what the intelligence did not say, to build the picture of what is actually here now in the configuration that might differ from what the orbital survey photographed 3 weeks ago. Then the action. This is where the diversity of the kill team pays off most visibly. The Space Wolf veteran crashes through the entry point at the moment the Raven Guard's infiltration has positioned the other team members in their optimal positions, drawing the enemy's attention and response to the direction it can see, while the things it cannot see are completing the parts of the mission that require completion without being shot at. The Ultramarine at the communication node is executing the information retrieval component of the mission in the 30 seconds that the distraction has purchased. The Salamander with the melter weapon is ensuring that the power core in the corner of the room does not survive the team's departure. Not every mission has this elegant a flow. Many are messier. The intelligence was wrong, or the enemy has adapted, or the objective location is not where the survey said it was. Teams that cannot improvise do not complete the mission, and some missions do not get completed. The Deathwatch's success rate is high by the standards of the operations it undertakes. Extraordinarily high, given the nature of those operations and the conditions under which they are conducted. But it is not perfect. Kill teams fail. Objectives are not reached, or are reached and not secured, or are secured at a cost that makes the strategic calculation behind the mission look different in retrospect than it did in the planning session. And warriors die. This is the thing that the statistics cannot fully convey. The kill team is small enough that every death is personal in a way that mass casualty engagements are not. A company of Space Marines can absorb 10 casualties and continue functioning. The operational structure is large enough that 10 deaths represent a reduction in capability rather than the loss of irreplaceable individuals. A kill team of 7 warriors that loses 2 has lost more than a quarter of its strength, and the 2 it has lost are people the remaining 5 have been working with for weeks or months or longer. People whose specific capabilities shape the team's planning, and whose absence creates gaps that cannot be improvised around. Not immediately. The survivors finish the mission if finishing is possible. The Deathwatch's culture on this is clear. You complete the mission that your fallen team members died in service of. You do not abandon the objective because completing it has become harder. You complete it because completing it is what they were there to help you do. And the completion is the thing that gives their death a weight beyond simply being a loss. Then you go back and you write the after-action report. And the report is as honest as the oath of silence permits. The operational detail, the enemy capabilities as observed, the intelligence value of what was retrieved, the assessment of what went wrong and why. And then the Watch Fortress processes what the kill team brought back. The Ordo Xenos analysts get to work on the intelligence materials, the recovered artifact goes to the study facility, and the planning for the next mission is already underway. The long vigil does not pause to mourn. The mourning happens in the brief intervals between the briefings. And then the next mission begins. The Great Rift changed everything, and the Deathwatch is not exempt. When the wound in reality tore across the galaxy, from the Eye of Terror to the Hadex anomaly, splitting the Imperium into dark and illuminated halves, it did not only affect the forces of chaos. It affected every strategic calculation every organization in the Imperium had been operating from. Supply lines were severed. Communication between regions became unreliable. The watch fortresses on the dark side of the rift found themselves cut off from the wider network, unable to coordinate with each other through the channels that had sustained Deathwatch operational planning. Managing their operational pictures with the intelligence they had on hand, rather than the intelligence that should have been flowing from the Watch's distributed network. And the Xenos threats, already significant before the rift, did not diminish with it. They exploited it. The Tyranid hive fleets benefit from the reduced coherence of Imperial response. The rift's disruption of warp travel makes it harder to move conventional military forces to where they are needed, which means that the hive fleets encounter less coordinated resistance than before. The Necron tombs that were activating before the rift have continued activating, and the disruption to the warp has in some cases interfered with the monitoring systems that gave the Ordo Xenos advance warning of activations, meaning that some awakenings have happened faster than expected and without the degree of advance intelligence that would have permitted appropriate Deathwatch response. The Tau, whose warp relationship is sufficiently distant from standard that the rift's effects on their navigation are less severe than its effects on Imperial navigation, have continued their sphere expansion with relatively less disruption than the Imperium has experienced, producing a strategic advantage in the longer-running competition for the territories that the rift now bisects. Into this, the Deathwatch adapts. Adaptation is what the Deathwatch does. It is built for it, the kill team structure, the decentralized watch fortress network, the doctrine of small units operating with high autonomy in uncertain conditions. All of this is exactly what the era Indomitus's chaos demands. Watch fortresses that can no longer receive regular intelligence updates from the wider network become more heavily reliant on the intelligence their own kill teams generate. And they deploy those kill teams more aggressively into intelligence gathering roles, accepting a higher operational tempo in order to maintain the picture they need to plan effective operations. The Primaris Marines arrive, brought by Guillemon's Indomitus crusade, and the Deathwatch receives them. Not without some of the same ambiguity that every established institution in the Adeptus Astartes experiences, in receiving warriors who are neither from their chapter nor from the traditional pool of secondment candidates. The Primaris are new, And the Deathwatch's culture is built on the integration of veterans whose experience is the value they bring. A Primaris warrior who has not yet accumulated the depth of campaign experience that makes a traditional secondment candidate valuable to the Watch is, in the kill team's operational context, not the same asset as the veteran whose decades of fighting their enemy makes him the team's most valuable specialist. But the Primaris also bring things the Deathwatch needs. Numbers. First, the Deathwatch's attrition rate in extended operations is significant, and the additional warriors are welcome regardless of the questions about integration. And capability second, the Primaris are better in various measurable respects than their firstborn counterparts. And the Deathwatch does not turn away improved capability on principle. The Watch commander who insists on traditional over better is not serving the mission. The Deathwatch also inherits the complexity of the current age's relationship to the lost and found. Gilliman returned. The Primarchs are not all gone. The galaxy in the era Indomitus has a quality of historical vertigo. Things that were believed permanent are proving contingent, and things that were believed settled are proving open. The strategic certainties that Watch Fortress planning has been built on for millennia are subject to revision in ways that institutional planning frameworks are not fully equipped for. None of this makes the alien threat go away. If anything, the era Indomitus has made the alien threat worse because the disruption of the Imperium's standard operational capacity has created opportunities that the galaxy's Xenos have not failed to exploit. Every warp storm that prevents a conventional military response is an opportunity. Every world that finds itself suddenly unsupported by the Imperial infrastructure it relied on is a world more vulnerable than it was. The Deathwatch, operating in the gap between what the conventional military can do and what the threat requires, finds the gap wider than it has been in any previous era. They operate in Imperium Nihilus, the dark half, where the Astronomicon cannot reach, and the warp is wilder, and the isolation of worlds from each other has created conditions that the species who do not depend on the Astronomicon for navigation are exploiting systematically. Deathwatch kill teams have been deployed into the Nihilus on missions that have no guaranteed return route, operating with the knowledge that the warp storms might shift before they can come back. That the Watch Fortress they launched from might be in a different strategic relationship to the current situation by the time they return than it was when they left. This is the long vigil at its most severe. Warriors who go in not knowing if they will be able to come out, carrying their mission requirements and their oaths, and the knowledge that the Deathwatch has asked this of them, because the mission requires it, and the Deathwatch asks its warriors for everything the mission requires. The warriors go anyway. This is what the oath meant when they swore it. And the record of their missions, incomplete, fragmentary, subject to the warp's disruption of communication, accumulates in whatever Watch Fortress archive can receive it, filed alongside the missions of the warriors who came before them, added to the 10,000 years of patient documentation that is the Deathwatch's other weapon against the things that want humanity dead. The galaxy is darker than it has been in any era since the heresy. The threats are more numerous, better positioned, more capable of exploiting the disruptions that the current age has produced. And the Deathwatch is still there, smaller, stretched, operating in harder conditions with less reliable support, but still there, still deploying kill teams against Xenos threats that the wider Imperium does not yet know it faces, still carrying the accumulated expertise of millennia in the black armour that has meant the same thing since the War of the Beast. The shield that slays. In the dark, that shield is still raised. There is a question that some of the Deathwatch's most experienced warriors eventually have to answer for themselves. And it is a question that the Watch's institutional culture does not formally address. Because formally addressing it would require acknowledging that the question exists. And acknowledging that the question exists would require explaining to the organization's theological overseers why the warriors who fight the alien every day are not simply warriors with superior technical knowledge. The question is, what does the alien actually mean? Not tactically, not operationally, philosophically, theologically. In the framework of a civilization that is built on the certainty that humanity is the proper inheritor of the galaxy, and that everything which is not human is either a tool to be used or a threat to be destroyed. Within that framework, what does a warrior make of what he learns when he learns the alien thoroughly? The warrior who has spent a decade studying the Tau and who understands the greater good not as enemy propaganda but as a functioning philosophy that produces real social cohesion and real military effectiveness. What does he think about the certainty that the Tau must be destroyed? Not whether to destroy them in the operational sense. That question has an institutional answer, but the underlying certainty. Whether the alien truly has no value. Whether there is something in what the Tau have built that is, if not good, then at least genuinely structured. Whether the Imperium's absolute position on Xenos is a strategic necessity or a theological article of faith. And whether the difference matters. Consider also the one who has studied Eldar, the ancient, arrogant, dying civilization that has been fighting for its survival for longer than humanity has been building cities, and who understands the weight of what the Eldar are carrying, the existential grief of a species that has watched its golden age become a death cult's mythology while the galaxy moved on without it. Does this warrior hate the Eldar? The Eldar are often enemies. They are also sometimes allies, in the pragmatic and uneasy way that the Deathwatch partners with whatever it must partner with to achieve the mission. But hate, as a stable emotional position toward an alien species, does it survive genuine understanding? The Deathwatch does not produce xenophiles, the warriors who come out of the Watch advocating for the alien, who have allowed understanding to become sympathy, and sympathy to become a challenge to the mission, do not last in the Watch and do not come back to their chapters unsupervised. The Ordo Xenos watches for this as carefully as it watches for any other operational risk. And the Inquisitors who oversee the Watch fortresses are not naive about the psychological effects of extended close engagement with the alien on the warriors who conduct it. But it does produce something more nuanced than the uncomplicated hatred that the Imperial creed prescribes. It produces warriors who know the alien well enough to respect what it represents, not the alien's claim to anything, not the alien's right to exist in opposition to humanity's interests, but the intelligence and the capability and the specific existential weight of what they are fighting. The Tau have built something. The Necrons have endured something. The Eldar have lost something. The Tyranids are expressing something at a biological level so fundamental that it bypasses the question of cultural value entirely. These are not the descriptions of things that are simply obstacles, simply targets. They are the descriptions of things that are in their own terms extraordinary. Understanding the enemy does not make the fight less effective. It makes it more so. But carrying that understanding alongside the mission is not always comfortable. It adds weight to what the warrior does and knows, weight that simpler soldiers never accumulate. There is a warrior in the records, described in an after-action report from Watch Fortress Eriok, unnamed, identified only by his chapter's color in the context of the mission, who wrote something in the personal notes section of his report that the Watch commander passed to the Ordo Xenos archive without redaction. He wrote, "I have spent 15 years killing things that are not human. I do not regret a single kill, but I understand now that the galaxy is not empty of meaning outside of what humanity brings to it. The meaning is different. The meaning is, in some cases, hostile to everything I am sworn to protect. But it is there, and the work I do is not the work of clearing away emptiness. It is the work of choosing, every day, that humanity's meaning is the meaning I am willing to die for." The archivist who processed this note flagged it for review and then cleared it without comment. It was filed alongside the after-action tactical data, which showed that the Warriors' kill team had achieved all primary objectives with no casualties. The philosophical note and the operational success sit side by side in the archive, each validating the other in a way that the classification scheme does not have a category for. This is the Deathwatch at its most internal, the organization built on destruction that generates, as a byproduct of doing its work thoroughly, the deepest understanding of the alien that any human institution possesses. Not despite the killing, but because of it. Because you cannot kill something 10,000 times across 1,000 different species and remain in the uncomplicated darkness of simple hatred. The knowledge comes whether you want it or not, and the warrior of any sophistication has to do something with the knowledge. The Deathwatch's warriors choose to do the mission with it, to carry the understanding and deploy it against the things they are sworn to fight, and to find in the choosing the specific daily renewed choice to stand in black armor against the galaxy's alien threats on behalf of a humanity that doesn't fully know what the Deathwatch does or why it matters. The answer to the question that the Imperial creed cannot quite provide. They know what the alien means. They fight it anyway. Not from ignorance, but from choice. That is what the long vigil ultimately produces. Not just warriors who are better at killing aliens than anyone else. Warriors who know exactly what they are killing and why they choose to. In 10,000 years of the Watch's existence, this has been both its greatest vulnerability and its deepest strength. The knowing cuts both ways. It creates the risk of understanding shading into sympathy. It creates the capability to fight with a precision and effectiveness that uncritical hatred can never produce. The Deathwatch has maintained this balance across 10,000 years, imperfectly and at cost, and the balance is what has made it what it is. The alien hunter who knows the alien completely. The warrior in black who carries the galaxy's most dangerous knowledge and uses it to protect the species that generates the danger. The shield that slays. Somewhere in the galaxy, a kill team is moving, not toward the enemy. Yet, the enemy is ahead. The kill team is in the space before contact, in the quality of attention that trained warriors in hostile territory inhabit, aware of everything, committing to nothing yet, reading the environment for the information that will determine the next 30 seconds when the next 30 seconds arrive. 5 warriors, or 7, or 12, wearing black armor in a darkness that the armor does not entirely resolve. They are from different worlds. They swore different oaths to different primarchs, and those primarchs built them to be different things. Here they are, the same thing, the Deathwatch, moving toward something that needs to be stopped. They do not know each other well. They have had days, perhaps weeks, of coordinated preparation. But the briefing was thorough, and the team leader knows who she has and what they can do. And the warriors know the shape of the plan, even if the plan is already adjusting to what the environment is showing them. The Raven Guard at the point is moving the way Raven Guard move, barely audible, barely visible. The centuries of his training and his gene seed and his personal history compressed into the care with which he crosses the open ground ahead. The Space Wolf behind him is doing what Space Wolves do, which is not moving like the Raven Guard, but moving correctly for what a Space Wolf does in this configuration, complementing what is in front of him. They are the Deathwatch. This is what that means in practice, not the history, not the watch fortresses, not the archives and the classified intelligence and the Inquisitorial framework and the millennia of accumulated doctrine. 5 warriors in the dark, reading an alien environment, carrying the tools appropriate to the specific enemy they have come to address, moving toward the thing that needs to happen. The Deathwatch has been doing this for 1,500 years. Before the formal structure in various arrangements between Ordo Xenos agents and loyal chapters, probably longer. From the first kill team that Corland assembled to go at the attack moon above Terra, to the kill teams operating in Imperium Nihilus, in the era Indomitus, without guaranteed return routes. The Deathwatch has been in the space between the known threat and the required response. In the dark, moving, the galaxy's alien threats are real. This is worth restating. In an era when the Imperium's greater theological and political struggles tend to occupy the foreground of the Imperium's self-understanding. The Xenos is not secondary. The Tyranid hive fleets consuming worlds from outside the galaxy's edge are not a background condition. The Necron tombs activating in increasing numbers across a galaxy that was their empire 60 million years before humanity reached the stars are not a minor strategic complication. The Tau expansion and the Orc endemic violence and the Eldar legacy and the 1,000 smaller alien threats that press against Imperial worlds in every region of space. These are real. And they kill real people. And they would kill more people without the Deathwatch than they do with it. The Deathwatch cannot stop all of them. It is 5 to 15 warriors, and there are billions of aliens. The kill team is not a solution to the Xenos problem in the way that a solution ends the problem. It is a management tool applied at the nodes where small interventions change large outcomes, the synapse creature whose removal alters the tactical situation on a contested world, the war boss whose death breaks the Wa'ar's coherence at the critical moment, the Tau commander whose elimination disrupts the strategic planning that was going to produce the next sphere expansion. The kill team does not win the war. It determines whether battles are lost or won. And those determinations accumulate into something that looks, over decades, like a difference. The warriors who make those determinations are not celebrated for it. The Deathwatch's victories are classified. The battles it changes are fought by forces who often do not know what changed the battle. and the gratitude of those forces, to the extent that gratitude enters the calculation at all, is gratitude toward the conditions that improved rather than toward the warriors who produced the improvement, the kill team that made it possible to hold the line on a contested world receives no tribute from the guard regiment that held the line, because the regiment does not know the kill team was there. The warriors accept this. They have accepted it since the Watch was founded, accepted it as part of the oath. The work is more important than the recognition, and the recognition would compromise the work, so the recognition does not exist. What exists instead is the mission itself, and the completion of the mission, and the after-action report that tells the Watch Fortress what the kill team found, and what it did, and what it brought back, and the next mission brief that is already waiting. There is a tradition in some Watch Fortresses, origin uncertain, present in different forms in fortresses that have no direct historical connection, of the Watch's warriors gathering briefly before a kill team deploys. Not for a formal ceremony, not for speeches or blessings or the rituals of faith that chaplains administer before standard engagements. Just a brief gathering. The team visible to those who are staying behind for the moment before they go. No one speaks. The warriors who are staying know where the team is going and what they will face. And the warriors who are going know what it means to be seen by people who understand what they are heading into and choose not to fill the moment with words. The silence says what the words would say, more completely than words could. Then the team goes. And the Watch Fortress returns to its work, the intelligence processing, the briefing preparation, the coordination with the Ordo Xenos, the maintenance of the operational picture that will tell the next team what it needs to know when the next team is ready to go. And in the gallery, the shields and records and names of warriors who have served and died in the Watch accumulate slowly, as they have accumulated since the first Watch commander received the first warriors who answered the first call. The long vigil, that is what it is. Not a campaign with a defined endpoint. Not a war that will be won in any conventional sense. A vigil, maintained continuously across the full span of the galaxy's dark regions, against the things that would end humanity if the vigil were not kept. 5 to 15 warriors at a time, deployed from Watch Fortresses that are themselves only known to those who need to know, carrying classified intelligence against classified enemies on missions that will not appear in the histories that the Imperium tells itself about what its warriors do. The galaxy does not want humanity to survive. But humanity has the Deathwatch, and somewhere in the dark, right now, in the moment before contact, a kill team is moving, and the things in front of it do not know it is coming.